I'm happy to present this this session, and only 1 minute to explain. The Cátedra QUAES-UPF is a platform with the aims to collaborate engineers and doctors because the biomedical procedures with engineering and medical physicians is more and more progress, and we are very interested in this line. Just now start the presentations, and please, when you...
Okay. Thank you. So, hello, we are from Hands-on number 6, and we are going to present you our work related with computer vision for medical image analysis. So, this is the pipeline that we are going to follow, and let's start with the introduction. So, just to put you in context, computer vision is a scientific discipline that aims to study the acquisition, processing, and analysis of images in order to obtain some information and perform some tasks, like, for example, segmentation, classification, or object detection. Since we are talking about biomedical applications, we can use computer vision, for example, for the resection of a tumor from a medical image in order to plan a resection intervention, for example. So, just to point out that depending on what you want to study, the most important medical imaging modalities that you can find are X-rays, CT, MRI, PET, ultrasound, among others. And the most important format types for medical images are NIfTI and DICOM. So moving on to computer vision concepts, we have to introduce you to CNNs. Convolutional neural networks are deep learning architectures that are very commonly used in computer vision in order to train models and be able to make new predictions. And this is the typical pipeline that a computer vision application follows, where first we begin with the data acquisition, where we need a big enough data set with good enough images in order to properly train, validate, and test our model. Then we have to choose the model architecture that performs better in our task of interest. Like, for example, ResNet-50, it's a very commonly used CNN architecture. Then, when we have the algorithm, we have to compute the error with a loss function. And this loss function is going to be interpreted by the optimizer, and the optimizer is going to update the model parameters in order to make to decrease this error and thus obtain better results and better accuracy. And moving on to the case of study, my colleague is going to start.
Okay, so for the case study, we had actually 2 cases. One of them was looking at diagnosing pneumonia from X-rays of the chest, and the other one was classifying the stages of diabetic retinopathy from photographs of the retina. The typical workflow when dealing with medical images is to start with labeled image, labeled as in whether the patient has pneumonia or not, or it could also be the segmentation. Every pixel of the image has to be classified as part of a class. Usually we don't have enough data to train a model properly, so we need some techniques to augment this data, and to do that you can try rotating your image, adding noise or blurring it, and this would essentially artificially create new data for the model to learn from. This augmented data is then fed to a pre-trained model like the ResNet that has been trained for completely different tasks, but it has been trained on millions of images, so it has learned a lot of interesting features. Those features we will take, so the feature extraction will be done by this pre-trained model, and that can be finding edges on an image or shadows yeah, there is a lot of possible features. Then we will feed those features to a bunch of dense layers, and these dense layers are the one we will train to differentiate between the classes we're interested in, so the pneumonia or the stages of diabetic retinopathy. And finally, that will give us our prediction that we will compare to the label of the image. So our experiments, we did exactly like this with those two data sets we had. We reached very good accuracy on differentiating pneumonia and non-pneumonia patients, 92% here. And on the other hand, for the diabetic retinopathy, we did not reach anything good enough, like 44%. This was typically a typical case of overfitting because the model was predicting very well, 98% on the data that it had seen before during the training, but on data that it had unseen, on new data, it was completely wrong. So that's a typical challenge of machine learning, and especially in medical science where you don't have much data. So other challenges are the explainability of those algorithms. How do you convince a clinician to trust this prediction? So one way to do it when you're dealing with images is that you can superpose a mask on the original image that will show you where the model was looking to make its prediction. This is this kind of image on the left, and you see that the model was actually looking at the lungs, which is quite promising to find pneumonia. And then another one is the data acquisition, that you need ground truth, and this ground truth can be hard to achieve, especially when it comes to segmenting the images. Here we had an attempt at segmenting the spine. Everyone tried, and you can see on the right those three attempts are very different and not of the same quality, and this will totally affect the final results if the segmentation is not done properly. Also, another problem is like the design of the study and the algorithm that might be biased towards certain populations. It might work for some ethnicities, for example, but it would not generalize to others because they haven't been included in the training data. So to conclude, there are a lot of challenges with machine learning, though it works very well and it has very promising applications. You need to consider the ethics of it, the portability, because they are very computationally hungry and memory hungry, and not every place has the resources to implement them. And finally, you have to find a trade-off between those issues and the accuracy of your model. Well, thank you for listening to it, and we will answer your question later.
So, hi, good afternoon. We are the group presenting the hands-on 3 and 4, and we are going to present you how we try to merge these two modalities to use the IV degeneration simulation to the spine correction surgery. Here's our table of content and the topics we are going to talk about. So first, a brief introduction. As I said, we are working with two hands-ons, so we had two main topics. The first one is about lumbar lordosis, or LL, that basically is a deviation of the alignment in the spinal cord that usually requires a surgery for its correction. This surgery is called sagittal imbalance deformity, or SID. The other topic was about intervertebral disc degeneration, and normally the diagnosis and the therapy for it are not collagenous, so there's a requirement of really good patient-specific models. With so much work to do, we needed to set a clear set of goals and topics we wanted to talk about, so we focused on the limitations and failures of the SID. Some of the factors that might intervene in it do not allow the correct correction of the spine, and there's a high risk of hardware failure. So knowing this, we decided to focus our work in trying to create a biomechanical model to predict, prevent, and try to evaluate the failure of these kind of surgeries, fusing the information that we could obtain through the IBD model. Now I will speak a little bit about the methodology we followed. First of all, as expected, we needed to gather the data and create the 3D models for both the intervertebral disc and the spines. For the intervertebral disc, we base our simulations in intervertebral discs generated by Carlos Ruiz and the landmarks that we extracted for the MRI of the patients. On the other hand, for the spine, we use stand-up radiologies and with different hospital softwares, like the 3D model and the mesh were generated. Then we needed to morph this model for them to be patient-specific or to adapt them through the surgery. So for the ABD model, using Bayesian coherent point drift, that basically allows us from a point of nodes of a source structure, morph them to the nodes in the target structure to adapt the morphologies. We used this technique to change the model of Carlos, of the intervertebral disc, to the nodes we have obtained from the MRIs of the patients. This was done through the morph function, that is a consecutive sequence of non-rigid and rigid transformations, as seen. Then for the spine, the mesh generated from the spine was it was also an ABG model that consisted of 8 vectors and 8 values that define the level of morphological deformity in the spine. And here is it seen like the interface Morteza created to change this kind of values to adapt the model of the spine to different morphologies to generate pre- and post-operative models. And then a final mesh was generated as seen. Finally, we started the biomechanical study. And for this, material properties, kinematic, boundary conditions, different loadings and steps needed to be defined, both in the spine and the intervertebral disc. And for this, we used different programs. For the intervertebral disc, we used FEBIO, and for the spine, we used Abacus. All of this was to assess the stress of the instrumentation and the biological tissue after the surgery to generate a prediction. And we wanted to test this process by the results obtained through the simulation in the intervertebral disc and the pressures and different stresses that we obtained. Finally, a brief explanation of how we simulated the surgery. The first step was to simulate the IBD swelling. And then we removed the tendons and forced some deformation in the model of the spine to imitate the procedures that the doctor would follow. And after this, the rods and structure of the hardware has to be meshed with the model of the spine, and the weight of the patient has to be applied to reproduce the loads these kind of structures would be under, and to understand what will happen after the surgery. Now we'll explain the results and discussion.
Okay, so we performed 4 experiments. The first one was regarding the IBD disc. Move on. So we had some problems with it, but at the end we managed to give you some good results, where we can see that the strain peak on the IBD, in the morphed IBD disc, happens at the step 4.3 seconds. And also this kind of simulations enables us to differentiate the nucleus pulposus and the annulus frivolus through the principal Lagrange strain graph versus the Y position. Move on. So the second experiment was to evaluate the 2 different configurations for lumbar lordosis, one at 49 degrees and another one at the 69. And we could see through the rod and screw failure, the vertebra and the annulus fibrosus stresses, that whenever the surgeon overestimated the lumbar lordosis, the risk of failure augmented drastically. So, and we determined that the optimal configuration was 49 degrees of lumbar lordosis. The third experiment was relating the role of a biomaterial, which we simulated titanium rods and chrome cobalt rods. And we can see here the effects on the stresses in the, we can see that, for example, that titanium rods have higher stresses on these 3, in the rods, the vertebra, and the annulus fibrosus, whereas the Chrome Cobalt doesn't. So that's due of the property that Chrome Cobalt is more stiffer, thus decreasing the mechanical complications on the lumbar lordosis. And finally, we experimented on whether the weight had an impact on the surgery, and the result says that it does. Whenever the mass of the patient increases, the stresses on the rods and the annulus fibrosus increase as well. So we determined that weight is a really important factor to assess and predict a rod breakage. And finally, the future work is our thoughts on how to couple these two methodologies. And it would be to first upgrade the patient-specific IBD model by making it statistical shape model. And with that, we calculate the reaction forces on the swelling phase, so we can better evaluate FEM analysis of the intervention by adding this data. And finally, calculate the postoperative proximal compression stresses, so we can, again, come back to the IBD model to evaluate risk of degradation and fracture, not just only instrumental failure. And so we propose this pipeline, and as explained, an SSM IBD model to analyze the swelling, create the spine model, finally, next, evaluate the surgery and get mechanical failure from the instrumentation and possible IBD degradation. With that, we hope that we'll make a faster simulation and with reduced computational cost. And well, thank you everyone for listening to us. And if you have some questions, we'll answer it on, well.
Yeah, and if the rest of the group want to come to answer the questions, so.
Okay, so.
Yo creo que sí. Ay. Okay. Good afternoon. We are hands-on too, and we are going to show you how important network modeling is in order to understand body behaviors such as osteoarthritis disease. Okay. What is osteoarthritis? Osteoarthritis is a multifactorial degeneration disease mainly characterized by bone damage and cartilage degeneration. A word focused in cartilage degeneration. Why? Because in a healthy cartilage, we can observe that there is an homeostatic equilibrium between catabolic, the molecules that degrade the cartilage, and anabolic, the ones that generate the cartilage. However, in osteoarthritic patients, we can see a disbalance of this equilibrium towards more catabolic molecules, causing the degeneration of the joint. Sorry. Moreover, go back, please. The network. Moreover, this interaction between catabolic and anabolic molecules generate a network, causing activation and inactivation interactions. So our main goal was to generate a regulatory molecule network for understanding osteoarthritis disease. Here you go.
Okay, so the first step of our hands-on was to build a regulatory network model. For that, we went on the literature and we looked for the interactions between different proteases, structural proteins, and pain-related factors. And from that data, we built a static model, like the one you can see here. But once we got the static model, we wanted a dynamical model. For that, we used the approach proposed by Mendoza and Scenarios, which they used a set of differential equations to get the expression rate of each node. And from these differential equations, we can get the steady state of the system, and we use this steady state to get the baseline of our system. Then, but looking at the results of the first literature-based network, we realized that it was highly catabolic. So we then tuned this network with the string database. We looked in this database for general protein-protein interactions in Homo sapiens, and those interactions had to, needed to have a protein score of 0.9. And as you can see, we enriched our model with more interactions, and we called the new model enriched model. But we thought that we still could optimize our network by simplifying the topology. And for that, we used a genetic algorithm, which is a kind of algorithm that uses a Darwinian approach in the sense that it generates new networks by introducing mutations to those networks and computing a fitness. We used 10 different fitness functions, and we generated 100 networks for each fitness function. So we ended up with 1,000 networks. And from all these networks, we had to choose the optimal one. And for that, we performed 2 tests. A qualitative test that means comparing our network with the literature. And a second test, which is the quantitative. This means comparing our network with experimental results. For that, we used 2 different datasets of experimental results, one for training and one for validation, and this is to avoid overfitting.
Okay, let's see the results. So here in the lower image, you can see the topology pattern of the network. And we had 29 nodes, so 29 molecules, and 133 interactions. Moreover, more interactions in one node mean it's a more important node. Okay, in the upper image, you can see the baseline, as already Danny mentioned, so the steady state of the network in blue. And moreover, to check that our network work well, we stimulated with pro-inflammatory molecules in order to see that the results were the expected ones. For the literature, as the literature of the joint was based in osteoarthritic patients, we agree that we are supposed to obtain more catabolic, the orange molecules, than anabolic. And here is what we can see. We can see that the blue lines in catabolic molecules are higher, and the blue ones, the anabolic ones, are low. That we agree that the literature result is good. Regarding the enriched one, here you can see that the nodes are the same, but we have more interactions. Moreover, we can see that in the baseline, regarding the blue lines, here, because the enriched represents a healthy cartilage, we have very high levels of anabolic molecules, the blue ones, and very low levels, well, non-levels of the catabolic ones. And when we stimulate it with the inflammatory ones, we obtain the opposite pattern. Okay, in order to check what is the optimized network, like the best optimized network that we created over the 1,000 networks that we generated with the 10 different optimization fitness functions. So we computed the errors, and we can see that the one that has the highest qualitative performance is the AMD fitness function. And regarding the errors is the one that has very balanced, like low errors. So we decided that the AMD fitness function is the best optimization process. Inside the AMD fitness function, the network number 19 was the best over all the 100 networks. So just to end up, the number 19 network was our optimized final network, and we plot the heat map of the optimized network, and we compare it with the enriched network, and we can see that they are pretty similar, although they are not quite the same, because, of course, the optimized one has some deviation error. So in conclusion, on computing and understanding molecular networks can be very helpful, for example, for clinical treatments, where to target in the network, what molecules to target, what molecules are more important or have more weight in the network. Drugs, anticipating the possible after secondary effects, etc. And computing the final state of networks is not only useful for cartilage, but also for other networks in the body or in the biological field. So of course we had some challenges, like not missing any interactions while reading, because we had short time of reading during these hands-ons.
Or we had also traveled to pass from the steady state equations to the dynamic ones, but we finally reached our results, and we are very happy of it. So thank you very much. We want to thank the VPH and our instructors. And well, as the cartilage has a network, like in a biomolecule network, the VPH has also created a molecular network, well, a person network.
Okay, so welcome to our presentation of the hands-on. We've been working on during this week in the VPH Summer School, and the project we've been working on is titled Stratification of Patients with Complex Phenotypes. So to make a bit of background, we have to say that it's known that in clinical practices, when patients share the very similar symptoms or they are overlapped, they are usually treated equally, and they are given simple and very rigid clinical guidelines. So this is a problem because this is not personalized medicine and not everyone is held equally. So what it's done is that we tried what we tried in this hands-on, that it was to do patient stratification, to try to identify phenogroups and to understand better the pathophysiology, and then do a more personalized medicine. So having said that, we can go through the dataset that we've used during this hands-on. This was provided by Hospital Clinic in Barcelona, and we had some control patients, hypertensive patients, and hypertrophic cardiomyopathy patients and their relatives. As you can see, the dataset consisted in cardiac pathology and in a cardiac pathology trial, more precisely on atrial fibrillation and hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So before going through the project, we have to talk about dimensionality reduction and its importance. Dimensionality reduction is very important in the clinicals because clinical data is high dimensional and heterogeneous, so it can be very challenging to understand it and interpret. Hence, it is important to do some dimensionality reduction by simplifying its representation, staying with the most important information in small number of dimensions, which is easier to interpret and to manage. Hence, we have used two principal methods to do this dimension reduction. The first one, the principal component analysis, which is known as PCA, and the multiple kernel learning, which is known as MKL. And the main difference is that the first one is linear, while the second one is nonlinear. So before going through the results, we wanted to point out that multidisciplinarity is key in this kind of studies, since the knowledge of different disciplines such as medicine, biology, and engineering has to merge together to try to obtain results which are efficient for the clinical approaches.
Well, as Manan has said, during this hands-on, we have worked with two dimensionality reduction algorithms that we applied to our 11 features that has our data using MATLAB tools. So the 11 features that we were working with are the left ventricular flow, the temporal aligning feature, tissue Doppler imaging, and different strains of the left ventricle and the left atrial. So the first step that we did was to apply PCA algorithms to our different features. And in this image, you can see the patients plot with respect to the two first principal components of each one of the features. So by visual, you can see that in the bottom right plot, the classes can be more distinguished, and so the left atrial global strain is more discriminative. Here you can see the plot bigger, and we also made a box plot to ensure that this discrimination was made. So using left atrial global strain, we tried to reconstruct from a single patient the original curve by using the 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 first principal components. And we can see that the curves are very similar between them and also with respect to the original one, which means that the two first principal components are storing the most important information of our data. So after talking PCA, we can move to multiple kernel learning. And the first step to do is to compute the difference kernel similarity matrix of each one of the features. So we can observe that each one of the kernels have the same dimensions, and also that in the diagonals, the values are equal to 1, as it is the similarity between the patient and himself. So then we use these multiple kernels using the MKL algorithm to obtain this output space where we represented our patients, and we also can see that the classes can be discriminated correctly. However, we use k-means clustering to observe the phenotypes that our data contain, and using silhouette methods, we compute the optimal value of number of clusters, which was 4. And from this, we apply k-means, and here you can see our clusters plot in the output space. Finally, using these clusters, we compute the mean for each one of the clusters for every feature. You can see here, plot all the curves, and now is where a clinician with its training could interpret the shapes and find pathological shapes that could be useful to decide the proper treatment to each patient.
So to end this presentation, we just wanted to give a brief idea of what we've learned during this hands-on. We have learned to do data imputation, which was something we have not done before. Also, we have experienced with distinct dimensionality reduction techniques such as PCA and MKL. And finally, we have learned to do this interpretation from the PCA and MKL results. So we just wanted to give thanks to our instructors, Pablo, Miki, Martí, and Mireia Macias, for their job. And also we want to thank you for your attention. And if you have any question, we will be very good. Don't hesitate to ask us. Thank you.
Welcome to our presentation about the hands-on 7 from phenotype to genotype. First of all, we want to say a bit of background about ourselves. We are both cell biologists and normally work in the wet lab. And we have not known that the terminal exists outside of the airport. So to open one on our computer was already a pretty big step. And also to find some pandas, even though we like them. Yeah. It was a nice experience.
Yeah. So, the aim of our hands-on was to check if we could find significant associated genetic variants in our selected phenotype. And for that purpose, we have been working during this week learning how to use Python language and how to open Jupyter Notebook. And we followed this workflow. So first of all, we had 3 different data sets from the genotype, phenotype, and covariance. And the first thing that we did was to define the phenotype that we want to associate. So we selected then the subjects with all the information using a key to link the genotype with the phenotype and the covariance. After that, we ran a principal component analysis from our genotype, for our genotype dataset, and we use it in order to adjust for our population structure, our linear regression, and then use that in the GWAS analysis. And then we try to see if we could find any association between the genotype and the selected phenotype.
As phenotype, we choose the Firman grade. So Paola chose Firman grade, I choose the modic changes. We will show Paola's data in this presentation. So we chose Firman 0 as control group and Firman bigger S2 as positive group. So we did then a new matrix with zeros and ones, as we did not want a multi-class, but a binary for either it's Firman or not. As covariance, since age can be associated with an increased Firman grade, we chose it as covariant. We then looked whether the data was normally distributed with the Shapiro test, first of all, since we usually do that, but with this increased sample size, we then did a QQ plot or a probability plot and saw that it is linear, so normal distributed. We then run our statistic tests according to the table nicely provided by Roger, and saw then that disk narrowing as well as the BMI are coupled to our phenotype or can be associated with our phenotype, which is also found in literature.
But of course, we have more challenges. So before running our GWAS, since all the genotype dataset is anonymized, we don't know the ethnicity background information of these genetic variants that could definitely bias our principal component analysis and also the GWAS. So for that, in order to avoid this bias, we also ran a template dataset with that contains all the ethnic groups, and then we overlap it with our PCA data in order to see if it is worth it or not to exclude one of these groups and reduce somehow the variability. In this case, it was quite equally distributed, and it was not really worth it to exclude one of these ethnic groups. So we did the PCR analysis, and then we ran the GWAS.
Yeah, we run the GWAS and then did the Manhattan plot, as this is also a standard plot. You see on the x-axis the chromosomes or the different SNPs, and on the y-axis and the p-value in a logarithmic scale. You can see, like in the red, dark red bar, that we have some hits. So those SNPs will be associated with our phenotype, and we have some potential SNPs. To further validate whether this is a true result, we then did a QQ plot from the experimental and the expected p-values and saw that it follows the expected distribution. Of course, we would then go further and further. It was a bit sad because Francesco prepared also a second part of the hands-on, but since we were really already struggling with the first bit, we were not as fast and could not go then further to really link the SNPs with then the genes and the associated function, which would have been the next step.
But anyway, we would like to thank our hands-on instructors because they really help us and they were really patient with us. So we will be happy later to answer all your questions. Thank you.
All right, so we're at, I guess, the last one in presentation and number, so hands-on 8. And in this workshop or hands-on, we're interested in going through the pipeline of how can we not just look at how people move, but what's actually going on, not just in the joint, but in the cells of the structures in the joint, and in this particular case, what's happening in the cartilage itself. So this is our kind of workflow, our pipeline, kind of 3 stages. We have, unlike the other ones, we actually have experimental data to collect, and we use that information to feed into musculoskeletal model, and from that output, we then do some finite element modeling, and then agent-based modeling at the end. So combining what we see visually with what's happening at joint level, and then again at the end at cellular level. So the first part is to actually collect the data. This is actually a very important part, not just because of how it is in the workflow, but if we get bad data, we're going to have a bad model. As they say, garbage in, garbage out. So the most important thing is to actually go through and collect good data. So we have the steps outlined here that we need to actually, within the lab system, coordinate, calibrate the coordinates so we know where the individual is within the lab, make sure that we can actually see them using these. You can't really see it on this image, but these reflective markers that are captured on these infrared cameras, they'll measure or basically reflect where this individual is in space. And then here that we have on the ground here, these gray squares or rectangles. These are force plates, measure the ground reaction force of the individual walking over the plate. And in this example, here we have normal gait, and we took 3 trials of that, and we also took 3 trials of this individual pretending to limp to simulate 2 different types of conditions. From this data, as we see here now in this example, these little white dots are the markers that we had placed on the individual, and these kind of red lines are segments connecting what is representative of human skeleton to some extent. And using this information, you can kind of see over these purple rectangles at the bottom, there's arrows going upwards. These represent the ground reaction force. And we use this information of where this person is in space and relative to the force plates. We get some estimates of the different joint forces. And in this case, we're interested in the knee. And then we took the average from 3 different normal trials and then the 3 limping trials that we can see from this particular example. And this was all done from the in-house software from the camera device. There's a few different ways to do it, but in this case was using this software. And then we use this information to then feed the rest of our modeling.
Okay. Then, as the idea here is to, perform a multi-scale modeling, then we move to a different model, a different scale here. So we jump from the whole body model we are tracking in the previous analysis. Now we move to the tissue level modeling. So in this case, we perform a finite element modeling of the cartilage in the tibial plateau of the knee joint. And to do that, we need to keep the consistency between the levels of the scales. So for that, we used, of course, in this case, the axial load the knee was experiencing now as inputs in our models. So at the upper part, we can see, different points we were interested in to analyze. For the normal walking, and on the bottom part, we can see then some point of interest in terms of loading of the limping. So we can clearly see that the normal gait present a higher peak, higher initial peak compared to the limping part. So there are some differences. And another difference was the time the limb was is like pushing or touching the ground. So there's another difference. So with these inputs, then we move to the actual model. So we perform here, this model I mentioned, we receive one nice mesh of the articular cartilage. We there define the material properties of the cartilage. We use fiber reinforced porous cartilage model, and also with the property of swelling. So the first a part of the model, we left the tissue to swell until reach an equilibrium stage, and then we perform or we apply the actual loading or the forces we measured in the previous analysis. And after this analysis, we select some one variable that was the total pressure, and at some point of interest, that was the highest value we observed in these models, even for walking, normal walking, or the limping case. And then we jump to the next level.
Okay, so the final scale that we looked at is actually the molecular scale, and we use an agent-based model here to describe the cartilage cell population and what's happening inside those cells. So these cells have, they can be fed in the pressure that they sense from the cartilage, and they actually also produce things as a response to what's happening around them. So they produce more ECM proteins or also enzymes that can degrade the ECM. So we looked at the effect of normal walking versus limping, and the force that is sensed by these cells and what's happening in these two conditions after we simulate the agent-based model. So we, we also adjusted the oxygen glucose these cells received based on the condition that they experience. So we assume that with limping, the cells would get less oxygen, less glucose, and would have a lower pH. So we adjusted these parameters, and we also adjusted the frequency of the force that they receive depending on walking versus limping observations from the first day, actually, so from the movement analysis. And then we run the simulations to have a 4-hour period of force experiencing in walking versus limping cells, and then we compare the results. But then we also use these type of equations, so ordinary differential equations of the type Mendoza scenarios, which was described by the previous group, so I'm not going to go into details about this. But then we look at the results. So we, generally speaking, we saw that cartilage cells which were experienced in a limping styled walk, they showed a catabolic shift. What do I mean by that? So we observed that, so this plot is like, the baseline is normal walking, so it's our gold standard. And what you see above the 0 line, it's actually upregulated in limping condition. And what you see, the downwards bars are like downregulated in limping condition. So what are upregulated ones? It's the MMP and ADAMs, which are actually enzymes degrading the cartilage ECM. And mostly the downregulated ones are the actual ECM proteins, so collagen 2 and aggregates, which are found in a healthy cartilage ECM. So we observed then a catabolic shift in the limping case, but of course it's difficult to like conclude that this cartilage would be dramatically affected by just 4 hours of walking. So I would be careful to like interpret this as a serious disease or something. It's just an information we gathered from a limping case and compare to the walking, but of course it's difficult to say after just like 4 hours of walking, this cartilage would be damaged terribly. It's just be careful.
Yeah, so to kind of conclude, when we think about this entire workflow in general, there's a lot of potential for this method to be able to look inside the cells of the joint and maybe give us some information about how we can maybe halt the progress or even prevent osteoarthritis or any sort of cartilage degeneration. Thank you for paying attention.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have all the hands-on presentations now. So maybe we can have some stable question to hands-on. So we can start with you guys. Hands-on 2.
Excellent. 8.
But let's start with you, yeah. Okay.
You mean combining the three types of models?
No, just the picture. You know, you're doing a project. I'm trying to compare it to the other exercises, and it felt on the surface like you were going for some big goals. Was there a lot of disagreement or debate at the beginning?
Well, if I understood it correctly, well, I think we didn't choose the workflow itself. It was already set up for us.
Okay.
So we were just following the pipeline.
Okay, no, that's an answer to the question.
Yeah.
But if you want to criticize, if you would criticize it, what would you criticize?
I
Put a bit pressure on the instructors.
Do you mean the pipeline itself?
The pipeline, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't want to answer on behalf of everybody, but I think that there's not really a different way to do it, because you need to, like I mentioned, actually capture the data, and then if you want to acquire what's happening at joint level, like with the forces, you have to follow that pipeline of then doing musculoskeletal modeling and finite element modeling to get even more specific measures. And then if you want to look at the cellular level itself, then you have to then continue again into the next phase. So there's not really any different way that you could change things or rearrange things, or but that's just.
I think what we would change was not the structure, like the pipeline itself, but I think we would like to go more into details in our like model definitions and so on. But of course, well, I mean, it's just a 4 days project, so we can't really optimize it. But I think what we discussed yesterday was like if we had, so we had a lot of assumptions building the finite element model and so on. So we would go like deeper in that aspects, I think, if we had more time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you want, we can go for hands-on 2. So, we'll discuss systems biology.
This is meant to test us, isn't it, by scrambling the... At the end, you talked about the value propositions and what your approach could be used for. And there's maybe 5, 6, 7 value propositions. So, you know, which one would you go after first? Because, you know, if somebody was following on from you or somebody was going to invest in what you were doing, they want you to be a little bit more concrete about, you know, because they can't all be equal value propositions.
Can I take the answer?
Yeah.
So, because I think systems biology goes a little bit hand by hand by systems pharmacology. So I would say the first thing, it gives you an idea of what kind of treatment you can go after.
Sorry, would you please use the microphone because people they don't hear. So
Yeah, sorry. So what I was saying is that I think systems biology and systems pharmacology are pretty connected. So I think this kind of approach would first indicate what happens on the disc, so it would definitely help a physician trying to understand what would be the first way to treat a condition. Let's say you might have a lot of MMPs, or you're like, okay, maybe I can, for example, put some TIMs, some inhibitors for the enzymes, or you might have a lot of degradation of a lot of, let's say you have a lot of anti-inflammatory cytokines, so you might go towards more anti-inflammatory medication. So we would definitely pinpoint a certain direction towards to what kind of approach could be. Maybe you could prioritize, say, okay, maybe we could use anti-inflammatory at the beginning, maybe we would go for antioxidants at the second, maybe we could go to some novel treatments at the third approach. And then I would definitely say if you have some new hits, you can have a new biomarker that could help in the diagnosis, prognosis, maybe in the treatment as well. And maybe you could also do some transcriptomics. Let's say you find different enzymes as well, try different inhibitors. So I would say maybe, yeah, to prioritize it, sorry, not make it wide, yeah. Prioritize what kind of treatment would be the best. Maybe a biomarker second. Drugs. Yeah, and if all this fails, then maybe something with pneumonia, maybe more experimental data. Yeah, more doctors, I would say, because one physician cannot say, it could be his decision, and then maybe some more physicians could also chip in and say, okay, we can also do this, that. Yeah, that's how I would think about it.
No, it's a perfectly okay answer.
Thank you.
I mean, you could bring in other factors like, you know, risk.
There is only one.
That's okay.
We can just use this one for talking points.
No. I mean, it's you know, it's not an easy answer to give. I just thought I would introduce it to see what, you know, to see what answer you could think of. You know, there's other factors. You know, there's the risk of doing one thing over another, and you know, you may not be the people to do that prioritization, which is fair enough. You know.
But I'm a little bit biased, but I would always choose transsymptomic data as well, just to see what's going on inside the cell as well. Because you can have a lot of data outside the cell, but then you can have one hit inside the cell, and that's it.
Are you speaking for the group or just yourself?
That's for me. I'm being the bully of the group now.
For the interest of time, thank you guys.
I think you have to also study the market, where you want to do the investigation, because maybe in some countries or some parts of the world there is more of a field investigated already, so you can focus your main priority in another topic.
Exactly.
So
There's
you have
another
to study the
factor,
market.
yeah, behind your decisions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey. Shoot.
So the question is, how did you decide at the very beginning of the project, how did you allocate the tasks to one another? Did you have a leader? How did you decide to separate the work? It's not at all a technical question.
Could you reframe the question, please?
Yeah. What I'm asking is, when you sat for the first morning in front of your work to be done, how did you decide between all the members of the group who would be doing what, who would be leader, who would be presenting, etc.?
Well, actually, was the way we were guided by the teacher on the hands-on was more like everybody tried to do everything, tried to understand the simulation, trying to reproduce the work of the teachers, and then we just tried to put it together and prepare the work for the presentation, but everybody did a bit of everything.
Well, just whenever, we reparted arbitrarily the experiments, we evaluated each of one of us different IBD models, and for the spinal experiments, I did, for example, the chrome versus titanium, whereas the other colleagues did the rest, so arbitrarily.
Some of them had the 49-degree case, the other the 69 case, and everybody got to do the same, but for different cases.
Okay. No, I was wondering whether you elected immediately to have a project manager who would lead the group and decide to give some organization to your group in order to be more efficient. That was all.
Well, no.
No.
Just at the to presenting part, Anais and I were really eager to get it.
That's actually a good point. That's the first time I'm hearing this question. But that's actually a good point. That's teamwork, so
Dyslexia.
Thank you guys. So let's move to the next to applications.
You don't have your presentation in front of you, but when I remember the goals at the start of the presentation, those were some big goals. Were you given those goals, or did you decide them yourselves? The goals you had on your first slide, you know, what you were looking to achieve, from what I gather, it's quite a short exercise that you were doing. Those were some big goals to be going after, some big objectives. Were you given those objectives, or did you decide them yourselves?
Yeah, we have the instructors give us guidelines with the objectives, and we follow them. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you would have to rethink this objective after your experience, so in which case would you apply this kind of complex certification?
Well, this can be useful for every data that has a lot of features and that you need a reduction dimensionality to deal with it. So, I don't know, maybe breast cancer or every disease that can have a lot of data and that it's difficult to manage. So, using this dimensionality reduction, you could manage better. I think. Well, I'm talking by me, but I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, guys.
So, computer vision, it looks a bit like a TV show that we say we would do it that way, so we're doing that.
We lost a few of them.
So on your group, I was wondering whether you had contacted an ophthalmologist after you got your data in order to discuss them and to interpret the data on the basis of a real physician, the opinion of a real physician.
Yeah, so we didn't have a discussion with a clinician as such, but we did do some, for example, some segmentation exercises, and like the ground truth for our algorithms was based on, somebody with more experience, let's say, who did the segmentation themselves, like a clinician would do it, or a physiotherapist, or somebody in the medical world. And then we kind of tried to do it ourselves and to see how much experience is actually needed to do such a good segmentations to have good ground truth. So normally when you build these kind of algorithms, you want to train them, and what you're training on, called the ground truth, these images are usually processed by some clinician in some phase.
Clinician or radiologist, I made a mistake.
Yeah, exactly. But we didn't have a direct contact with a clinician.
Thank you. The results from pneumonia and the eyes analysis are very different. If you would start again, would you choose instead of the eye another part, or you would make the things differently to be sure that you're able to get results on that part?
I don't think we're not giving up on people with diabetic retinopathy because we failed here. Is that you mean for the hands-on? Would we try with?
Yeah.
Different case.
Yeah, exactly. So you get great results in one case and bad results in the other, what would you do?
Well, I think it's actually interesting to have bad results sometimes, and in this case, because it could tell us, well, if we manage, which we didn't have time to find why did it fail. because the data set was decently big. But yeah, it's interesting to know why. And for example, I know that in the case of classifying retina images, you always try to, not always, but often try to just segment the blood vessels to help the model learning features. And so it's interesting to see that if segmenting those blood vessels increases the accuracy, that means that the blood vessels have a lot to do with the disease. So that could be one of the input from failure, of the output of the failure.
Can I just add on to that maybe? Like we had two different cases, but the one where, so the one case with the pneumonia, we actually had, like the algorithm was supposed to say yes or no, this person and has either pneumonia or not. But with the second case, we actually wanted the algorithm to classify it in 5 different classifications. So that's kind of harder to do. So that means if we want to really improve that algorithm, we would need, for example, a much better data set of images to improve it. So it's not that the issue might not be necessarily the application itself. There could be underlying causes as to why that application was not having a very good fit.
Guys, can I ask you a quick question which is relevant to all the presentations? What made you pick accuracy as a metric for that particular case?
Accuracy. So it's accuracy is typically like a ratio of how many images did we classify wrong, how many like true positives, false positive, false negatives.
Yeah.
And that's a typical score. But then I know there are different ones. We didn't explore that because we were a little short on time. But
no, it's really, that's a totally fair answer. It's an answer I would give, maybe 10 years ago. But the thing to think about, you're all in, these are all healthcare studies, and the thing to focus on when you have a healthcare situation is risk, and it's the error that becomes more important rather than what you're getting right. So false positives and false negatives very rarely have the same risk level. In your case, you can have 92% accurate. But if all of your failures are false positives, you'll go, well, that's okay, because there'll be another test and another test. And if the person doesn't have, the bad thing, you can have 99% accuracy, but if your 1% is false negative, so it's just something to bear in mind whenever you're doing metrics from now on, which is to Emmanuel's point, you want to have a domain expert in the team as early as possible, or at least a connection to a domain expert, and be prepared to change your metrics as you move forward. It's not a metrics race, okay? But just bear in mind that results have context.
Okay, that's a good point, Gordon. Thanks. So last question then for the last group. Thank you, guys.
The topic or the number?
Linking phenotypes and genotypes.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, sorry, I forgot that. Just so I get the right question. You mentioned that you're new to Python and Jupyter and pandas and stuff like that. Did I get you right that it was literally the week that you were given the exercise, or is it quite a short time frame?
Yes. So we all had it like for once in like back in uni, but then we focused both like on going to the wet lab. So we are part of the Disk for All project, and so we are kind of the ones that feed the system with our biological data. And so yes, for us it was pretty new and pretty nice to see, because like Roger and Francesco are also part of this project. And so to really see how our data, or how data then gets like processed further into this whole network.
So how did it feel to be on the other side?
Well, I know where I belong. Yeah, well, I do know where I belong. I do like wet lab a lot. I get frustrated if something does not work on my computer. And I mean, it was a nice experience, I must say. I mean, I like also to see what is possible, and I think also with the great talks in the morning to see how far this all has come and what's
also
possible.
that even we can use this kind of methodologies to apply in our data, because of course we are not used to it to have like tons of data, like maybe with the genotype variants, but it is true that sometimes we gather also more data, and it's really useful for analyzing it, and it could really help us, I think.
And it was nice to see also the difference between, usually we have like sample sizes of like, in biology you go like for 3 donors because it's not possible to do like 200 replicates, right? So we go for like 3 to 5 donors, and then like they explain us that, yeah, but if you then do like the normalization, or if you look if it's parametric or non-parametric, it gives you like a wrong result in that sense, and then you have to go to the QQ plot, which is then like, you see that it's normally distributed, and I did not.
It's like the statistic change, totally.
Yeah. I had a quick GDPR question for you. Did you ask permission from the guys before you put their photograph up? And I am only joking.
Yes, we did.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, guys. So what I propose, because we're a bit behind of schedule and coffee break is already served, so maybe we can leave the jury talking quietly about the hands-on. We can go out, have a coffee, and then we come back for the results. Okay. So let's come back at 4, and we'll start the roundtable 5 minutes late. That's fine.
For the roundtable, do we have a pointer, user pointer?
Was great. I think the poster sessions have been very active, and the posters were all of very high quality, and that's great to see, to have seen so much discussion in front of the poster. So not only with senior researchers, but also among early stage researchers, even with bachelor students, and it was really a great intergenerational and interdisciplinary integration. So it's quite unique, and thank you all for that. And thank you also for the quality of the poster. So we had more than 10 reviewers that during all the week came to the posters, asked you questions. So you didn't know whether they were reviewers or not. And they assessed every poster according to the originality of the work, the quality of the methodology, the possible impact of the results. Each poster had received three independent reviews, and then all the independent reviews were made together. There was no necessity of deambiguations. The scores were very clear, and we have a winner. And the winner is Sofia Tseranidou. For her work, nucleus pulposus cell network modeling in early intervertebral degeneration. Sofia, you're here. So I would like to disclose that the awards are for everyone. So actually the criteria of selection of the awards and the reviewers were so instructed that it shouldn't depend on seniority. So the way the research has been communicated during the posters was very, very important. So now we come to the QUAES-UPF Best Hands-On Award. So maybe I will let Edward to announce the winner. Edward, do you want to do that? So the winner is not Eric Topol. Eric Topol is present.
Thank you. It's very difficult to decide because the level was very high and especially the works done in such short time and it's congratulations to all presenters, all presentations and all speakers. But the winner are all, but sorry, but only one winner is a hands-on 3-4 spine and intervertebral disc modeling.
Congratulations, guys. Yeah, come on. Down and we take a picture before the one thing. Nice. And so the jury. So I will start the roundtable now. I think if you want, well, yeah. So we now start with a roundtable. Just wanted to have the OK from the technicians because there are people connected on Zoom. Sorry, there are some Zoom manipulation so that people who are online can hear correctly. Can I just switch back to my computer just for the introduction? And then... Okay, thank you. Okay, so welcome to this QUAES-UPF Roundtable. So it's called Good Practices in Ethics and in Silico Medicine and E-Health. Why have we decided to do this roundtable? So EIT Health, I don't know if you know EIT Health, but this is a major European consortium that promotes the technology transfer, the transfer of healthcare technology to the society. So has a working group working on artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence can transform the healthcare and the working force worldwide. And we'll not specifically talk about AI here, but about in silico medicine in general and in silico technologies in general. But I think the reflections are much more advanced in the domain of AI for obvious reasons. So there are very interesting things to pick up here, and that can be applied to the in silico spectrum. So first of all, there is the analysis of the segmentation of the application sectors. So there is chronic care management, self-care prevention, wellness, triage and diagnostics, clinical decision support, care delivery. So I really recommend you, if you're interested, to read this report that has been co-produced by EIT Health and McKinsey. It's really instructive. So, and if you read this report, and for any of these sectors, you can ask certain questions that are related to ethical aspects. The most obvious one and linked to technology is how to ensure that models can properly anticipate evidences. So during this summer school, we had very nice presentations that already highlighted the importance to define a purpose, specific context of use, then to have to do a proper exercise of verification, consistency of the models, and validation. We'll not discuss how a validation should be exactly implemented, because there are certainly a lot of nuances that will depend on the technology and on the degree of complexity of a model. But certainly there is direct validation, indirect validation, and all should be validation, so to ensure a proper anticipation of evidences according to specific purpose and context of use. Then, and I put an example here. So I don't know if you know this series, and I'm doing a bit of advertisement here. That's DopeSeek. That's the story of a drug in the US, which was anti-pain drug, an analgesic based on opioids. And pharmaceutical company was claiming that it was not generating addiction. And it's based on a true story, actually. And they got FDA approval, they got the label that it was not generating addiction. And one of the key documents they had to get this approval was a document that was showing a delayed release of the drug because of how it was wrapped in the pills, and that the level of drug released in the body would never reach a certain level. And they had represented that graphic on a logarithmic scale. And the representation of on the logarithmic scale showed clearly that, yeah, there was no drug addiction. If you would put it in a normal scale, then the interpretation would be completely different. And this drug has killed many people during many years. And they had a lot of struggles, actually, to force or to convince the FDA to change the label and in order to protect the population. So we're just talking about a curve on a sheet of paper, either in a scale that is logarithmic or not logarithmic. This is a representation. This is probably the most basic definition of what a model is. So this is a very simple example to show you that we don't need to go into complex computer models in order to see possible pitfalls of modeling and verification and validation. Then, how to ensure model and simulation-related software standardization and certification. If I'm going to a clinic that is using a certain model to predict my health, I don't want to have a different predictions if I'm going in another clinic, or I don't want to have another prediction if the hospital to which I'm going is changing the software provider. Then how to ensure that the use of models won't create exclusion, discrimination. So I have put an example. This is another movie. I love science fiction, and which is Welcome to Gattaca. It's not a new movie. It's I think it's from the 90s. So here they basically have artificial intelligence algorithms that analyze your DNA, and they classify the population in terms of persons at risk to have certain responsibilities of the population. So they basically then define who will be the alphas and who will be the betas and who will be the deltas of the society. And once you're classified according to one hair or a drop of blood. Sorry. There's nothing you can do to evolve in the society. This is science fiction, but very recently we knew another example which is extremely basic. All these digital certificates for COVID. So there were a lot of elders who even didn't have a smartphone. They are still with the old Nokia that you unfold. And so these people were basically put at the margin of the society or were made completely dependent on having possibly families or friends able to handle properly the technologies. So no need to go into science fiction to already see examples. How to ensure that the wide use of models won't create unwanted behavior in the population. So if you see the compulsive behavior that only a like button can generate on platforms such as Facebook and Twitters. So imagine the type of behavior that an app where you can constantly monitor your constants and these constants are constantly related with, I don't know, when you will die, Oh, today, great, I have slept well, I have won half an hour of life. Tomorrow it will be 2 hours, And is it desirable to have this kind of application? It might drive people really crazy. So this is another aspect, exacerbated hypochondria, prediction addiction, compulsive behaviors. So there are many questions around ethicals for digital health, and in this roundtable, so I'm very happy that we have been able to gather several experts. So we'll articulate debate around following points. So current standards for model safety, artificial intelligence data, software certification, proper use of simulation technologies in health, so recommendations, empowerment of patients, citizens, then looking to the future, health predictions, preventions, possible ethical pitfalls of short-term, long-term predictions, and access to proper technology, education, and inequalities. So to start with, Jose Manuel Santa Barbara, who is representing the QUAES Foundation, will give some introductory words. And then, so we will have our different actors of the roundtable: Marco Visconti, Luca Emili, Gordon Johnston, Giuseppe Vergès, and Alessandro Blasime, who will be given the word and will present their experience and interact so under professional chairing of Marta, who is here, Marta Pulido, and I will give you the word in few seconds. So I will also let you introduce properly all the speakers. And in order to guide the debate around the different points I have highlighted. And of course, that's a complex system. We have many agents interacting together. So we're really expecting also to see emergence, ideas, and considerations coming out of that. So that's it. Roundtable is open. So maybe now we can switch to Zoom. And Marta, from now on, I leave you chair the session. Maybe we give the word to Jose Manuel Santa Barbara first, but he will be on Zoom, so we need to switch the screen. And yes, and then.
Okay, so I was presenting our foundation that I have to move fastly to end our presentation because there is a big delay, and I think the important is to come. So I would like to justify our support for this event, as the theme of that event affects us more and more every day. and in a very positive way. For this, I would like to explain our numbers. For example, in our foundation, we are working in more than 600 clinical trials, in vivo clinical trials, but we are starting nowadays more than 20 in silico studies. And after a big effort working in the perception of patients about clinical research, we're starting one new challenge, helping patients to understand and participate in silico trials, explaining them that it will be the digital twin composed by their images, their medical records, etc., who will participate in this research. But we are also starting to participate fully in ongoing projects or study based in silicon, for which we need for these purposes an enormous quantity of data. This can be prospective or retrospective. When the collection of data is prospective, there is no problem because we find them very similar to in vivo trials. But the problem for us, and where is big gray areas, is when we need or we want to use retrospective data. I'm sure the next people talking today will clarify this point, I'm sure. For all these reasons, given that we understand that it's still a great challenge, we want to share our point of view and learn from the experts that today are invited. And that's all, and thank you for this opportunity.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Well,
Yes.
Thank you, Jose Manuel, and thank you, the audience, for your patience. We are sorry for this inconvenience, although we have to confess that we are so much into in silico medicine that we were just trying some kind of multiverse. So that's the reason that we were hearing so many Jeromes and Jose Manuel. And well, just to continue with this interesting topic, and because I know that this has been a very busy week and that you are, well, maybe you want some drinks after all, I will explain how this dynamic will go. We will have the first part of the session that our standing speakers that are coming from public institutions, private companies, and also from patient representation. They will explain their know-how and expertise in silico and digital health medicine. And later on, we will discuss more topics. And I encourage you to participate also in the discussion of the roundtable. So, next speaker is Josep Vergés, who is the president and CEO of the Osteoarthritis Foundation International, an independent non-profit foundation that it's aimed to promote scientific research in the field of osteoarthritis to improve the quality of life of the patients and people who suffer this condition. So, Josep, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, good afternoon. I would like to thank the organizers. In the University of Pompeu Fabra, that is a very prestigious university. And also I'm very happy that the patients could be participate, in this roundtable, Well, I would present myself. I am a patient, but I am, at the same time, I am a medical doctor, And we represent approximately in Spain 7 million of patients with OA, and also with osteoarthritis. And at the same time, I am the president also from the Women Patient Society in osteoporosis. That means that more or less we represent 10 million. The Osteoarthritis Foundation International, we are leader in the world the problem of osteoarthritis. With the Arthritis Foundation in the United States, we create the task force, and we more or less, we have 400 million people that we are working together internationally. Well, the osteoarthritis is, a very important disease. According with the Lancet Commission that we participate, there are approximately 500 million of people in the world affected with osteoarthritis. In the last 20 years, it was a lot of people, and we represent patients that they have OA. Also, women, not forget it, that the osteoarthritic problem is a gender disease. This is very important. And also we represent patients also that they have osteoarthritis because they are doing bad the sports. The sports is another problem in osteoarthritis, especially from the high-level competition. No? We create the foundation because, even it's a lot of people that have osteoarthritis. I always say that osteoarthritis is not a glamour disease, okay? Sometimes you go to the doctor, and the doctor tells you, well, it's the age, nothing to do with, and this is a mistake. This is the mythos of OA. There's a lot of things that must be done, and I think that's the reason that we create the WAFI to help to the patients, no? We are very active. We are doing our congress in Barcelona, that international congress in Madrid. We are working in Madrid also in sport medicine because it's a source of problems. And also we are working especially with women because I can tell you some data that more or less 23% of the women that for more than 15 years has osteoarthritis. Repeat, 23% of women that more than 15 years has osteoarthritis, okay? We see a young woman with osteoarthritis because there is some problems of the morphotype, genetic problems, and also sports high-level competition. And also it's another important issue with women because in the menopause time, it increases a lot. That means that there is a lot of women that they have OA. The same with osteoporosis, okay? That means that it's a very important disease. Normally, it's a lot of research is made in cancer, in cardiovascular, but not too much in the field, of the palatal-muscular system. I think this is a very important issue. Don't forget that the children that today they born in Barcelona, they will, if the COVID helps, they will arrive to 100 years old. That means that I can tell you that Spain is the geriatric country in Europe and the second in the world, okay? Because, it's a lot of people coming around Europe to live in Spain, Barcelona, in Cádiz, in Menorca, in Ibiza, It's a lot of people. That is very important issue to take in mind. And the quality of life for patients with osteoarthritis is very bad. Worse than oncologist patients because they have pain, they have depression, anxiety, they cannot sleep during the night, they have cardiovascular comorbidities, etc. No? But only the WAFI, in order to, to not be longer, we are doing a lot of activities in clinical trials, working with health authorities. We are very active. We are the first to have a program, TV program, radio TV program with patients. We have more or less 40 millions of visions per year. That means we are doing a lot of activities to write to the patients. And you are making research, and I will tell you that patients are very important to be involved in the beginning, not in the clinical trial, in the beginning of the idea. My advice, if you like to have some project in OA, on osteoporosis, in sarcopenia, please, in the first idea, check it with the patients, not to wait in the end of the trials, because it's a mistake. Sometimes I can give you some examples that there is some drug, that arrive and patients, they don't like it. For example, I can make one example. Do you know that the patients with OA, the color of the pill, that they like it? Never ask to the patients, what is the color of the pill? We make a survey and they like blue and green. That means if you go with a red color, probably they will not take it. It's interesting to know that. What is exactly the patients they like, and this is very important. Sometimes we don't take care about that. I think it's very important. I can explain a lot of examples, no? Well, I think it will be nice to discuss about this topic, no? And I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much, and we'll be discussed later. Thank you, Marta.
Thank you, Josep. Well, now you know, color is important, and it's also important to bear in mind patients and collaborate with them, not just at the end of the process, but also to the beginning. And so next move to the next speaker, Marco. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, Marco. Well,
hi, everyone.
I will present you. Marco is a full professor of computational biomechanics at the University of Bologna and founder of the VPH. Marco is one of the key figures in silico medicine, so please listen to him carefully. Marco, whenever you want, we're excited to learn from you for the next 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. The topic I'm going to focus on this brief introduction is the situation of silico medicine around the use of modeling and simulation for the development of new drugs. Why? Because this is a particularly complicated scenario right now. I will try to describe this in the next few minutes. So the fundamental question is, can we predict life? Can we use a computer model, a mathematical model, to predict what is happening around the health of an individual? If you ask to someone like Giovanni Borrelli, who was one of the founders of what today we would call biomechanics, his answer would probably be yes, because at that time, it was quite natural to see, to investigate the human body on the whatever law physics were available at that time. But eventually, we consume a divergence between physics on one side that focus on inanimated objects and biology that focused on living organisms. Things started to change after the Second World War. I think a turning point was the publication in 1958 of the paper from Alan Hodgkin and Andrew Huxley on the action potential in neuron, which deserved them the Nobel Prize in 1963. This was one of the first examples where a systematic, mathematical, deductive approach, typical of physical science, was used in medicine, in physiology in this case, and produced extraordinarily valuable results. Around this agenda in 2005, the idea of creating a computer representation of the human body that could be used as decision support system in hospitals was started. And in Europe, the term we used at that time was the virtual physiological human. Over the years, this idea expanded and became a reality. And now we can say, yes, computer model, mathematical model can predict health. And here there is a list of absolutely partial and incomplete, but it gives you the span from prostatectomy to diabetes to osteoporosis to cardiotoxicity to cardiosurgery and so on. What are the success stories that we observed in the last few years in terms of using models as a regulatory tool for new medical products? Well, a first important event was the acceptance in 2008 by the FDA of the possibility of using a model, an in silico model, as an alternative to animal experimentation to test algorithms that controlled artificial pancreas for children with diabetes type 1. That was a very important step. It was the first time that a complex physiology-based model involving patient-specific modeling was used in such context, but it was also a very, very special context. And I have to say, the agenda was driven by the patient association in this case. So again, very important, the involvement of the patient in this conversation from day one. So this didn't follow up. There was no major breakthrough for quite a bit of years, okay, after the 2008 approval. We have to wait until many years after, when recently the FDA accepted as a possible replacement for animal experiment a complete in silico pathway to demonstrate the so-called MRI safety. Medical devices that are implanted in the body may create problem if the patient wearing the device then has to undergo an MRI. So now medical devices have to declare whether they are MRI safe or not. this is a sort of additional certification, and to do this now, at least in the United States, you can use a completely in silico pathway, not as opposite to very complex animal experiments. The Laxus test story, it's a few years ago. This was a submission by Medtronic, and again, FDA accepted a scenario where a particular requirement for this new defibrillator developed by Medtronic, a requirement related to the risk of mechanical failure of the leads connecting the unit to the electrodes, was studied by combining physical patient enrolled in a clinical trial with virtual patient run in an in silico model. But the good news kind of end here in the sense that, as you notice, all the examples I made are related to medical devices. We have still a lot of problems in terms of adoption around in silico trials in general, but and here there are listed some. But a big one is related to the use of this technology in the certification of medicinal products. So as part of the in silico work project that I lead, we are currently preparing 2 qualification advice with the European Medicine Agency, one for an in silico trial solution aimed to test, to help testing new osteoporosis treatments, and one aimed to test new treatment for tuberculosis. What we expect with this submission is to start a public discussion with the regulator, in this case, the European Medicine Agency, and develop a mutual understanding of what the problem, what are the barriers that are making difficult the adoption. In the meanwhile, we are trying to consolidate the community of practice made of academics, people working in industry, regulators themselves, experts in various agencies who are interested and involved in this topic to join our in silico work community of practice. There are a number of challenges to discuss all relevant topics related to in silico medicine, but one particularly important is the one where we are driving the so-called good simulation practice. This is a position paper that we are developing with the contribution of more than 100 experts. And we hope it will provide a sort of a baseline for the good practice when you want to use a computer model to support evidences in a regulatory process for medical device, but also for medicinal products. There are still major topics being discussed. For example, recently we realized that the term in silico trials, which sounds very elegant in the general conversation where the word trial means experiment, in the specific regulatory context is misleading, because in the regulatory context, trial is an interventional clinical trial. We are now starting to use different terminologies. We call it in silico methodologies. The only technical standard we have that support the evaluation of credibility for models in this context is the ASME VNV40, which, however, was not conceived for data-driven model. So it's not clear how we can validate data-driven model, which are an important subcategory of in silico trials. And then there is a very complicated discussion going on with the drug regulator around whether we should separate technical and clinical validation. I don't have the time to enter into the detail, but it's really 2 different points of view clashing here. I would stop here. Unfortunately, I have to finish on a negative note. I did not plan for 1 hour delay, I'm sorry. And I have another obligation, so at one point I will have to quietly disappear. I'm very sorry for this, but I cannot avoid it. Thank you.
It's time for Luca Emili. I think that he's here. Luca is an entrepreneur and investor. It's the founder and current CEO in Silico Trial Technologies, the first global platform that it's making easy-to-use modeling and simulation to accelerate the pace of innovation in the healthcare and life science industry. So, Luca, please, we are all ears. And I also congratulate the speakers to stick time.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much. Just a moment to integrate my computer here. So first of all, I have to say that I was really amazed by the presentation today from the researchers who have done the work on the hands-on. When I heard that it was just 15 hours of work, I was really surprised about that because it looks like 15 days. So really congratulations to everyone. And I have to say that one element that hit me a lot on that is the fact that there was very, very great combination in many of these projects regarding modeling, simulation, and AI. And this is a topic that I really love because many times there is a discussion among the groups of researchers on differentiation from AI and modeling simulation, as we are doing modeling simulation, we're doing AI. So there is a sort of, let me say, fight sometimes from the conceptual point of view. And this is something that I think is not fine for many reasons. First of all, because the idea of everyone is to use this kind of tools. I'm sharing the slides, so probably you are able to project. Yeah, okay. As we are here to accelerate the development of drugs and medical devices, at the end of the day, modeling simulation, AI, or scripting, Python, or MATLAB, they are just tools. What I think is really, really important in the mind of all of us is what we can do, what are the tools that we can use to accelerate that part. But there is another element that in this activity of, let's say, hyper-acceleration of drug and medical devices that these kind of digital tools can support, and is the regulatory part. Mark already mentioned some of these here. There's slides where I'm referring to what FDA is saying, that now computer generate a little part of the digital evidences for regulatory approval, while in the future they expect that about 50% of the data used for the approval will come from virtual patient and computer. And also September last year, there was a vote by European Parliament that decided, that proposed, let me say, to ban the use of animals in the research. Of course, it was a proposal, not something that becoming effective now, but anyway, it's a push in this direction already. Marco mentioned some experiments, some activity. I can tell you that Roche, for example, publicly announced that by 2030, they want to ban the use of animals in their own development. So when I was talking about AI, modeling simulation, etc., and now referring to regulation, one element that is very, very important, and this is something that I launched in the community, is that at the end of the day, for the understanding of the not expert people, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an engineer, I'm a degree in economy, so probably I'm the only one here with a degree in economy. And many times I find that I'm the only one with a degree in economy in many of the meetings, VPH, Private Channel Alliance, and so on. So I have a point of view that's a bit different, and also entrepreneur, but I have, let me say, an outside point of view on some scientific topic. And what I can see is that, of course, you can see also as well that AI is having a lot of echo, we could say is a hype, but is receiving investment, is receiving attention, etc. While in the regulatory space, of course, they have to consider these kind of tools. And the qualification of AI tools by FDA are now a lot. Many of them are on imaging analysis. While at the same time, we discuss about modeling simulation, integrating regulation to be accepted as an outcome and so on. And there will be in the future probably a need of rationalization, where, this is my point of view, we will have to decide what is the name that cover everything that we are doing. As we have seen this morning, the presentation by this early afternoon, by the people who work on this hands-on activity, you can say this is AI, this is modeling simulation, everything is combined. So probably we will have to find out a term under a sort of umbrella and to stay under that umbrella. And probably, I know that I'm saying something that don't sound nice to a lot of modelers. Probably the AI is the name that we have to stay under. Not because from the scientific point of view, modeling is AI, but because we can't have 2-3 different names on digital tools that 99% of people is just able to associate to a computer. And that's one element. So food for thoughts, future discussion. I don't want to take much of your time about this, but the idea is that everything is mixing. So in the past, what people were doing client server or desktop, and then okay, no, I'm doing desktop development. No, I'm doing client server. Oh, okay, this is better. This is worse. Or I'm doing web based. No, web based is insecure. So it's informatics, it's IT, it's development. So I don't want to banalize this part, but I think it would be very, very important from the regulatory point of view to think about that what we are doing is use of tools. That could be AI, could be modeling simulation, could be other things, and that would be very, very important to be sure that in the future regulation there will be computerized system, computerized component that will be accepted in integration or avoiding the fact that you have to go to animal or labs or human testing. So the market from this point of view is highly fragmented. So this is not really a market. If you think about the biggest company in the modeling simulation called the Certara, make just 300 million of revenue worldwide. So probably there is no company that is market leader worldwide in any market that makes just 300 million of revenues. And there is also a shortage of expertise. We know here how hard it is to train someone that is knowledgeable in science, biology, and then also computer simulation. So in fact, one of the things that impacted me was the level of discussion before on scripting and Python and use of AI tools, etc. So young generation are more common in these kind of tools versus the others that. So if you consider researchers 20 years ago, it was not like that. There are cybersecurity issues. This is something that the company continues to talk about. And this activity is quite time-consuming in not standardized process. Before Marco mentioned the good simulation practices, and this is a very, very important initiative by the IV Channel Alliance, with VPH and in Silico World, to start to define a framework for the use of modeling simulation towards regulatory activities. You have to consider that about 90% of the investment in the life science for R&D are under regulatory definition. So not labs activity, but usually clinical trial and stuff like that. So it's where most of the money is going. And as we are talking about software, it's also important to consider that there is a business model trend for the software commercialization that is at the moment in 2022 basically software as a service, online system, online platform, and this is growing. So everyone developing a software, we had also some presentation this morning, have to think about that the software developing is going to be provided to other customers in a web-based solution, software as a service, etc. From this point of view, I had a previous experience as CEO of a cybersecurity startup from 2000 to 2010, and I can tell you that in 2001, going around talk about cybersecurity is like to go in some company now to talk about modeling simulation. So people say, "Oh, what is that?" No, I just hired a guy from a university. He's doing that, and now you know the story. So 20 years after. So starting from this approach, as in Silico Trials, we started to work with a lot of researchers. Now we are partnering in this for all and in other 3 Horizon 2020 project with a lot of researchers, basically leveraging this business model. So giving the opportunity to hospitals to provide virtual patients and also to scientific partners that are more than 70 all around the world to provide us with their own simulation and AI tools developed that are integrated in the platform then provided to companies. We're working with CROs, life science or drugs and medical devices company, and now starting also to work with hospitals, because basically what we want to do to facilitate the use of these kind of models going towards the modernization of the business model for the software is that we want to change this approach. Now companies go to a lot of researchers scattered through the world that are using modeling but to provide just outcome, to provide consultancy. They're not able to provide a scalable value of what they have developed to companies, because the software they have developed, the component, the Python tools or the models are not shareable, because they embed all the know-how, so the researcher don't provide that to the company. What we are doing is that once we have on a platform the model developed by the researchers, covered by, let's say, a layer that is a web interface that let the user just provide input or receive output, then we are protecting the IP that belongs to researchers, but at the same time we make it scalable for company to use these kind of digital tools. So once we talk about modeling simulation, we're talking about softwares, and the software need to be scalable. Otherwise, it's consultancy more than software. So please keep in mind this. Every time you approach some models, every time you approach some project where you have software, make it scalable. There was some question before also regarding startups, etc., etc. Everything related to the market of software need to be scalable, because this makes the people be able to work in a democratization of the tools. This is something that all of us is benefiting, and taking the cost for the use of the model down and distributing knowledge in a very effective way. In the platform we have developed, we are integrating different kind of models coming from the researchers, model that we develop on demand. For example, now we one of our partner that is a spin-off of a university for a pharma company. We are customizing a model on a specific therapeutic area because they are providing us the data to make it specific for an approval from a regulatory body. Or we use our platform to integrate the model that the company developed inside and then distribute inside their own network. Now we're discussing, for example, with a pharma company that have more than 200 models developed inside, and they are not able to distribute this model all around the world. So in this approach, we have a scientific partner workflow. So we start from NDA, we evaluate the market, then we evaluate the tool, and basically at the end of the day, we start to have the tool on the platform provided to the customer. Already mentioned, we are working on 3 Horizon 2020. This is brain teaser, in silico word, sim cardio test, and there is a Disk for All project. And very happy to talk with all the developer, all the researchers that would like to take to the market models. And here are my contact. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Luca, for this outstanding presentation. I hope that you have so many questions for Luca that we will just go after the presentations. Now let's move to our 4th speaker, Gordon Johnson, who is a chartered engineer at Johnson & Johnson and has more than 25 years experience in medical device and pharmaceuticals companies. He will be representing his own views, but please listen carefully because Gordon has so much to say. So, Gordon, the floor is yours for the next 10 minutes.
Thanks, Marta. Hello again, everyone. So, there we go, there's the pointer. Okay. So I'm going to be the odd one out because, and if I can get my mouse to work. Here we go. Oh dear. Hang on. Get the mouse. Get it back into. I know I'm using up valuable time. For some reason, it's disabled the mouse. Okay, hang on. Let's open up again. Okay, here we go. Yeah, some engineer. It just is jumping out the slideshow, I don't know why.
If you press F5.
Yeah. Yep. There we go. Okay, excellent. So Yeah, I'm going to be the odd one out because everybody else who's spoken before me has kind of talked from the point of view of their own business. It's nothing mysterious, but sorry. I'm usually told I've got a very loud voice, but there we go. Okay, so as I was saying, I'm going to do it a little differently from everybody else. I'm going to talk on my own behalf instead of talking for Johnson & Johnson. I'm just required to do that by my company, and it's pretty normal for big organizations. And again, it's nothing mysterious. It's just that in such a big organization, you know, I can't answer specific questions in detail, you know, because I simply don't know the answers to all of those specific questions in detail. But what I can do is talk from a general industry perspective. You know, I'm part of working groups within Digital Europe. I'm part of working groups within MedTech Europe, and I'll touch on it in a later slide. But these have a real diversity of companies. Marta's already gone through that, so I'll jump through it. It sounds like I'm showing off. So something to kind of really get across to you from an industry perspective. If you're working as a specialist, as a subject matter expert, you know, as a computational modeling expert, as an artificial intelligence expert, you know, whatever, you have to work with non-technical stakeholders. You have to work with non-expert stakeholders. So even people that are supporting you making regulatory submissions, even people that are supporting you with policy, advancing policy positions to get in silico adopted, you know, these are not going to be close enough to you to ever learn all of the detail. So this is how it works in a mature scenario, right? We start with regulations from an ethical perspective. You know, you move on to standards. Sometimes the regulations get issued with guidance from the regulators just because, you know, they want to be more specific themselves. They don't want to wait for the standards to come. But you also have what we call horizontal and vertical standards. Horizontal standards are, you know, non-industry specific. And really, you want them to come out before the vertical standards because when you're in a vertical standards scenario, you don't want to be arguing about the definitions of very simple terms. Okay, you want the horizontal stuff to do that for you. You then have organizations, you know, have to build their own frameworks internally. So, you know, policies is where you'll see an organization speak to ethical intent. So they'll recognize the regulations, they'll speak to the basics of those regulations, but that's also where you'll see companies use the language that, you know, that speaks to ethical intent. Okay, a credo, if you will, you know, a mindset, a belief system. Okay, all companies have them. You know, and fundamentally, you know, it's about advancing healthcare. You know, it's about doing the best, you know, for the world as a whole. And then obviously, at the end of the day, and this is a very two-dimensional diagram, but all through that, and it's not just that blue jigsaw piece that speaks to people. There's people all through that, but ultimately, it's how, you know, the action, all of those previous steps speak to intent. It's the action that decides, you know, ultimately what the ethical outcome is. So quickly, I know I have to move through these very quickly. I'm going to jump in and agree with Luca 100%. You know, it's the world that's going to decide what things are called. You know, we can call it in silico, we can call it computational modeling and simulation, you know, we can call it machine learning, but really, everybody's going to just start calling it artificial intelligence. Why? Because going back to the non-expert, the non-technical, everything's going to be a black box. And the buzzword label for that black box is artificial intelligence. What this is trying to get across to you is this is an unprecedented level of regulation. You know, this is global regulation for AI in 3 years. And you can bet your bottom dollar that there will be overlap, but there will be differences. You know, so, you know, this all adds to the complexity. This all adds to the complexity. And most importantly, where these regulations speak to is they don't just speak to the model that you're creating. They don't just speak to the prediction, right, that you want from the model. Ultimately, none of that works unless you have an architecture that's reliable and stable, right? So you need to think about full digital stack solutions. You need to think about IoT. You need to think about endpoint sensors. You need to think about database management. You know, most importantly, and this is key for anybody who goes off into the future to work in machine learning in the clinical space, the clinical user is going to become the nexus for data collection. The clinical user is going to become the nexus for retraining of models. So, you know, they're going to have a really important role in the governance of AI. So for the most part, I'm going to generalize under that AI umbrella, but, you know, I will touch on in silico in a moment. So, yeah, just getting to that horizontal and vertical standards. Regulations tend to be very general, very high level. You know, they have to speak to legal clarity, regulations, okay? They have to speak to legal clarity, so they can be very generalized, very simplified. Standards don't tell you exactly how you should do something, but they tell you how you can do something. And the reality of standards is once they exist, it tends to be the foundations on which notified bodies work. Okay, so if you're being inspected or you're handing in a submission and a standard exists, at least one standard exists, don't be surprised if that's the kind of minimum that the notified body is looking for. So, you know, the onus is on you because for the most part, in silico AI for a long time to come is going to be a state-of-the-art conversation. You know, standards are going to come out and they're going to be redundant within a very short period of time, or they're going to be up for being updated. The regulations won't be. You don't really need to change regulations that often. You know, maybe every sort of 15, 20 years do you really need to revisit a regulation. One of the sort of challenges we have at the moment is we have the medical device regulation, which has recently, you know, been applied. It's been signed off for a few years, but it's only recently come into being from an application point of view. The MDR does, thankfully, have one mention of in silico and one mention of computational modeling as evidence components. So that's really, really super helpful. What's happened is you also have the EU AI Act, which is currently going through the parliamentary process. And the challenge for the EU AI Act is it's a horizontal regulation. And it calls out, it's pulled the MDR under its full umbrella. So, you know, myself and a lot of other people are currently advocating for, you know, a better balance there. But you have problems with interplay between regulations. And the challenge you have as an organization is to kind of manage these aspects, okay? It's not the job of regulators to make it easy for you. It's not the job of standards organizations to make it easy for you. You know, they are all about protecting the consumer. So, you know, and, you know, industry is all about protecting the consumer. So it just adds more complexity to that, you know, the complexity that you're already dealing with in you know, creating credible models. Again, if you look over on the right, those are all the horizontal standards that have came out for AI in the last couple of years, from ISO, IEC, IEEE, you know. So again, standards don't tell you exactly how to do something, they tell you how you can do something. And the bottom line is, you know, with all of those different players, you know, there's lots of different ways to peel an onion, okay? You also have vertical general standards like the ISO ones there for TC 215. You know, and you can jump up and down that, and depending on your areas of interest, you can see that there's, you know, generic vertical standards for the healthcare industry. And then sometimes you'll get a very specific technical standard. That's where you'll find the notified bodies being very, very specific. You know, if you have a technical standard. So, you know, if you're at the beginning of something, just, you know, it's always worthwhile doing a little literature search just to see what's out there. Okay, and then that way you have guide rails. And, or you know, whatever you have to try and get beyond, because ultimately you want to try and demonstrate that you're doing more than the standard. What's really changed in the last couple of years, and it goes back to that whole non-technical, non-expert conversation, is, you know, it's still software at the end of the day, okay? It's still zeros and ones, all right? It's still all of the things that come with that. It's still security, it's still version control, et cetera, et cetera. What's changed is you've introduced a whole new language that's challenging enough for the people close to the technology to agree on. But for the people who have to support, you know, the delivery of healthcare solutions, this new language obviously has created, you know, a lot of instability. You know, they find it difficult to even, you know, understand why they have to think about transparency. When, you know, I learned transparency at school, why is it a different meaning? You know, why is bias not what I understand bias to be? You know, what do you mean by statistical bias? What's the difference between that and societal bias, et cetera, et cetera. So this is really, you know, one of the biggest challenges is that you've introduced all that new language for non-technical people. Now, again, going back to the steady stream of guidances, regulations, and standards, you know, fortunately, the actual regulators forum has got together and kind of, you know, tried to get a handle on most of the big terms right away. So that's really helpful for when you're talking to a regulatory manager or you know, somebody in legal in your business or somebody in the policy side in your business. You know, you can help settle that conversation pretty quickly. And again, you know, these aren't small documents. You know, the one on the left is something like 34 pages. The one on the right is something like 80. You know, you wouldn't believe that somebody can write an 80-page document on categories of bias, but there are literally about 30 to 40 categories of bias. One of them, and I'm not casting aspersions on anybody in the room, but one of them is on about doing something naughty to get funding. Okay, so that's one of the categories of bias. And again, you know, no aspersions to people in the room. Forgive me, I'm moving quickly through this. Hopefully I'm going fast now. So yeah, just getting to the in silico side of things specifically, and you know, Marco's touched on it in good detail. Luke has mentioned it as well. You know, the device side of the world is ahead of this. You know, the drug side is catching up from a regulatory perspective. There are people in the drug regulatory business who have been behind in silico for a while, but you know, and Emmanuel and Cecile touched on this morning. There's still a good majority of people on the drug side, you know, that kind of don't buy into the whole side of it. But there's no ignoring it. There's no ignoring it. And what's driving a lot of that, not being able to ignore it, is the way we make synthetic drugs now is moving increasingly to continuous manufacturing. You know, you don't want to make drugs in batches. If you can make, you know, a month's worth of one drug and just split it up into batches to suit yourself. So, you know, a lot of modeling is going on in pharmaceuticals, mechanistic modeling, chemometric modeling, surrogate modeling for batch release. Okay, quickly moving through that. This is Digital Europe. This is Digital Europe's membership. If you'd asked 10 years ago what's going to be the membership of a healthcare consortium, it wouldn't have had Google in it. It wouldn't have had Rockwell Automation. It wouldn't have had NVIDIA, so on and so forth. So bearing in mind, you know, this is how seriously these organizations take regulations and standards. It's to such an extent that, you know, Google have just hired the guy who used to be in charge of the digital health unit in the FDA. Sorry, going again, quickly moving through. So, you know, ethically, this is Digital Europe. Again, very quickly, ethically, this is Digital Europe, an industry organization proposing what a data sharing framework should look like. You know, focus on health communities, you know, benefits for all, and a focus on digital health literacy. And this is really important, and it goes back to all those words that were falling out of the clouds earlier. Again, these are super recent. A draft report from the legal committee to the European Parliament. They're proposing a European Certificate of Ethical Compliance. It's going to be interesting how that gets put into practice. And the French presidency, which I think is just coming to an end at the end of next month, they've introduced this ethical principles. Humanistic values, you know, enabling. I think number 2 is going to be a difficult one to, but maybe we'll touch on that in the Q&A. And again, you know, despite everything you've heard, ultimately from an industry perspective, that's how you operate. That's how we operate. That's how the regulators expect us to operate. So it's all about living into that, you know, living into the complexity, living into what evidence means going forward. You know, evidence is evidence. If you can prove that it's credible, whether it came from, you know, something in the physical world or something that came in the digital world, you know, we'll get over it. We will get over it. It will not be an insurmountable challenge. So just on a final point, even if you don't have regulations, even if you don't have standards, those don't stop you getting market access. They don't stop you getting market approval. They just make it more challenging and more of a state-of-the-art conversation. Okay, and you know, I'm sure we'll show. The last point, yeah, there is always room for innovation. So don't think about this as, you know, you being put in a cage or a pair of handcuffs. It doesn't stop you from doing something, you know, really clever tomorrow. Thank you. Sorry, Marta, overrun by a couple. Thank you.
Many thanks, Gordon. Well, I have to confess that I'm also biased to language, maybe because I am a scientist turned to communication, but I'm also aware of the importance to be clear and transparent when we want to communicate. So let's move on. And last but not least, Alessandro, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me well?
Great. Yeah. Okay, so let's introduce Alessandro Blasimina, who is the reader of bioethics at ETH Zurich. He's an expert in translational medicine, precision medicine, regenerative medicine, genetic engineering, digital health, and aging. Alessandro, you have a little more time, although we are running late. So you have 20 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. And yes, I will try to go maybe 5 minutes shorter so that we can save some time for discussion later. So let me share my screen. Okay, I think it works. Yes, I see from the window that you can see my screen. Okay, good. So I was asked to offer an overview of the most pressing ethical challenges in the use of artificial intelligence in medicine. Obviously, the ethics of artificial intelligence is one of the most rapidly growing domains in ethics in general. And definitely the ethical issues around the use of AI in medicine are among the most interesting and the more uncertain part of this conversation. So I was thinking that today I might do a good service to you if I could give you an overview of AI and its associated ethical challenges in 3 specific domains, that is biomedical research, clinical applications, and public health. I will go through these quite rapidly through a few examples, and then I will focus on what are the most interesting ethical issues and challenges in this space, and I will close with some reflections on where regulation is going in order to catch up with these emerging ethical issues, and I will tell you my personal view on whether the current direction of emerging regulatory efforts is the appropriate one. Okay. So let's start with biomedical research. As I said, I will only give you a brief taste of the direction of the general discussion here. One of the most interesting areas in research that features the use of AI is about areas that are deeply driven by big data, and some of the most readily available health-related data that we have is electronic health records. Electronic health records are possibly a very valuable source of health-related information, not only for purposes like optimization of health management at the level of healthcare institutions, but also for purposes like outcome prediction or phenotyping and so on and so forth. In particular, in the domain of precision medicine, there is a strong interest for harnessing the potential of huge amounts of electronic health records to be interrogated with the aim of deep learning in order to conduct large-scale longitudinal studies in precision medicine. Of course, this is not limited just to clinical data, but also involves the use of social and behavioral data. And there are problems associated with these attempts because as rich as these data sets might ever be, there is a problem of composition of the existing data sets. These data sets are often very biased in socio-demographic ways, and therefore there are concerns about whether the use of electronic health records to study patterns of health inequality might actually contribute to the perpetuation of those inequalities because of the unstructured and unsystematic nature of these data used to train AI algorithms. Another area of interest for the use of AI is drug discovery, of course, and the use of AI for drug discovery is again very appealing because it can help predict chemical and physiological features of molecules, and also help designing new molecules for molecular targets. This area is less controversial from an ethical point of view, but the problem here is that, as we have alluded to in the discussions that we had so far, these algorithms are fundamentally black boxes, the interpretation of which is very problematic. So there is a lot of discussion about the development of explainable artificial intelligence algorithms in drug discovery. Of course, explainability is a problem that cuts through all the possible applications of AI to medical issues, and we will go back to this problem later on in this presentation. There are ways to dispel some of the opacity of AI algorithms also in the domain of drug discovery, but the problem here is basically that lack of explainability or lack of transparency is a limiting factor for drug discovery, because those algorithms would have to drive investment in pharmacological development of specific compounds without knowing without knowing a lot about the mechanistic explanation behind the prediction of the AI in this domain. Another issue that we have with drug discovery and AI is the problem with dual use, meaning the possible misuse of these kind of technologies for purposes that have nothing to do with finding new chemical pharmacological weapons against human disease, but actually some people are worried that the very same algorithms might help developing weapons, biological weapons, or tools for bioterrorism. This is not specific to the domain of AI. It's a conversation that has long been going on, for example, in the domain of synthetic biology. If you think of gain-of-function research on human viruses, we have heard these over and over again. But I just wanted to point out that this is an ongoing conversation. Arguably the most interesting applications of AI in medicine have to do with AI-driven predictions in the domain of clinical medicine. Here is a very typical example of an AI, a deep neural network that is able to classify skin cancer or any skin lesion based on features that are morphological and so on. So the idea here is to develop an algorithm that can perform a diagnosis, or as you see on the right here, an algorithm that can predict, in this case, cardiovascular risk, by looking at images of the retinal fundus of the patient. So this is particularly interesting because if you read the paper, the researchers admit that actually they had no reason to believe that these kind of images would contain information about cardiovascular risk in the first place. So they were really shooting in the dark, so to say, in this particular case. But you can imagine how this kind of technical development might actually really be a game changer in medicine. Of course, with COVID-19, we have seen an explosion of AI application. This is in particular a tool to prognosticate COVID-19 patients based on chest X-ray and clinical data. So basically here you have yet another possibility to use AI in clinical medicine. This is an algorithm, a very interesting one, to predict mortality risk in COVID-19 patients. And what is interesting here from an ethical point of view is that if you look at this graph on the right, this is a representation of the clinical features that the algorithm is taking into account, and those at the top are those that are more meaningful to the prediction made by the algorithm. And of course, you see at the top of it age. So this is an algorithm that systematically, so to say, penalizes people due to their age. So whether we want an algorithm to take into account a variable that we know is associated with the risk of mortality with this disease or not, it's not only a clinical question, but also an ethical one. So do we really want an algorithm that gives so much weight to age as a predictor? Of course, it is a predictor and we know it, but if any clinical decision should be automated based on that, we should take into account the risk of what ethicists call ageism, that is discrimination against people due to their age. These are other examples of algorithms that can harness electronic health records to optimize patient management. So they might also be able to reduce healthcare costs. But in fact, this is an issue that needs to be addressed also from an ethics point of view. On the right, you see an algorithm that can predict short-term mortality in cancer patients. That is, again, interesting as an aid to decisions, for example, about starting a new cycle of chemotherapy. Again, this is not only a clinical issue, but also an ethical one. We need to take into account the preferences of the patient and the quality of life of the patient, and whether it is the right thing for a given patient to start another round of chemotherapy rather than dying peacefully at home, for example. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen a lot of discussion about the use of digital tools in public health. Definitely, digital contact tracing apps have been the most prominent of these technologies. Most of us have downloaded one or the other version of these apps. And the same is true of digital vaccine certification apps. And in Europe, we had a pan-European initiative about that. But actually, less attention has been paid to the explosion of research for the use of artificial intelligence in the context of COVID-19. And this applies to the full spectrum, from diagnosis to epidemiological studies and treatment, vaccination, everything. And this kind of research involved all versions of AI models, and as well it relied on the use of a huge variety of different data sources. So this is a few examples, apps that through AI were allegedly able to make a diagnosis based on how the cough of a patient would sound. Here we have obviously big problems of validations, especially validations during the rushed medical pace of the pandemic. And here you have another example. This is an algorithm that was used in Greece to screen for incoming passengers who would be more at risk of carrying the infection into the country. So this algorithm basically triages passengers for testing and self-isolation upon entering the borders of Greece. So this is something that was actually used for real. As I said, there is a huge array of ethical debates going on around the use of AI for medicine, from privacy to informed consent, to biased algorithms, to issues of liability, explainability, and so on. I would focus on a subset of these issues in the interest of time. Algorithmic bias is definitely among the most hotly discussed issues. We know that the adage garbage in, garbage out applies to the use of data also to train medical AI algorithms. So these algorithms, depending on the composition of training data sets, are prone to either bias, this underfitting, or variance, that is the risk of overfitting, or the discoveries of spurious correlations, of course. In both cases, the risk is that implementing AI algorithms on a large scale might actually exacerbate existing health inequalities, and this is a concern that many are working on from an ethical point of view, but also from a technical point of view, with technical solutions to mitigate the risk of bias emerging basically regularly every day in the literature. What will happen to the clinical responsibility of doctors once AI will automate part, at least, of medical decision making is an important legal issue that is still open and unsettled. But definitely the most discussed issue in this space is explainability. So these algorithms we know are black boxes, so we don't know what the algorithm has learned to be able to perform its predictions, and to do its clusterings, and to basically model the most salient, statistically salient features of the phenomenon that we ask the algorithm to apply to. But what do we mean with opacity? What do we mean with lack of explainability? Well, different people mean different things. This is an overview of the most common understandings of opacity, that is impossibility to access the rules that an algorithm has learned, or impossibility to make sense of them due to excessive complexity. Or the last option is that an algorithm is said to be opaque when it is impossible to understand what is that associates input and output from a mechanistic point of view. Now, this issue cuts through an important issue in philosophy of medicine, that is what constitutes a justified medical act. So a doctor is supposed to know what she's doing, not just trying things out for no reason. So in the presence of opacity, does it still make sense to say that medical decision making is based upon justifying reasons that can be either theoretical or practical? Now, I will skip the details here because I don't want to eat up too much time, but it's clear that explainability is something that runs the risk, or I should say lack of explainability is something that runs the risk of jeopardizing sound and justified medical acts, unless we adopt a different sort of paradigm. So this is what certain commentators in the field are arguing for, that we should only care about the accuracy of AI algorithms and not be too much obsessed by explainability requirements. Nevertheless, there is a lot of research on how to make deep learning algorithms explainable, at least post hoc. So when we have very complex models, some people are arguing that we can rely on heat maps that highlight, for example, in the case of images, highlight the areas of a medical image that the algorithm is attributing a lot of importance to. But this is also risky because of the risk of confirmatory bias on the part of doctors, and actually even not perfectly accurate networks can produce saliency maps or heat maps that can appear reassuring to doctors without actually providing much of an explanation to the prediction made by the algorithm. This is why a lot of people are actually arguing that we should not run those risks of being further confused by existing methods of explainability. And we have summarized some of these considerations in some papers, some publications recently. So I'm just putting them here for you, for those of you who are interested to check further. But one lingering issue is that maybe we should also be focusing our attention and the attention of regulation on what constitutes a good clinical validation of an AI algorithm, a topic that we have already discussed and that I think we will discuss later on in the roundtable, because evidence shows that only a handful of AI algorithms for medicine are actually validated through randomized controlled clinical trials, which might or might not be the gold standard in this field, but still it's not very widespread at the moment. AI solutionism is the last problem that I want to focus on. This is the idea that as long as you have data, you can compute any human outcome based on machine learning. But there are areas in which this is not so obvious. For example, for conditions like autism spectrum disorder or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, the idea of making a diagnosis based on MRI images might sound interesting, but it's actually quite problematic because we have no reason at the moment to believe that these two conditions in particular have a counterpart in brain morphology. So basically trying to develop this kind of algorithm is quite a risky business, especially for patients that will end up being diagnosed in this way, basically without knowing anything about the causal domain model that should support the rationale for doing that in the first place. So I want to close with some very limited...
Sorry, Alessandro, but we are 22 minutes.
Yes, I'm done. So existing horizontal regulation is already paying attention to explanatory issues in AI. So this is from the GDPR. The AI Act is also containing provisions about transparency, but I would like to argue that actually it's not very clear what the focus of this, the ethical focus of these regulations is. So is this emerging regulation really trying to protect the well-being and the rights of research participants and patients, or what? I leave it as an open question. My own view is that the focus of these regulations is actually not that I put up in this slide here. So I leave that as an open issue for discussion later on, and I'm done. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Alessandro. Well, actually, we are at the end of the session, according to time. I will ask speakers that are here in the room to come at the front, please. if you agree, I think that we can leave the discussion for 30 more minutes. What do you think, Jerome? Well, I will just put some of the questions that I have prepared. I will try to select the most interesting ones. But I also encourage you to start thinking about anything you want to ask, because we will have the last 5-10 minutes for you to talk with the speakers. Okay, so let me think. Okay. Well, I think that's pretty clear from the talks that our speakers have given that digital health is transforming our healthcare systems in all the world. It promises benefits for patients, but also I think that it can lead, as some of you have pointed out, some to health inequalities. For instance, digital illiteracy can lead to unequal access to health systems. And I'm thinking about poor people, also to homeless or people suffering from some diseases. So I will ask to, I think that Marco, are you here with us?
Yes.
Okay, so
a few minutes still.
Okay, so I have all 6 of you. So to all of you, I will ask you to know, how can we guarantee a fair digital healthcare system for everybody? Anyone who wants to begin? Okay, Luca?
Yeah, let me be provocative. I mean, I don't think that this is going to take to inequality. I think it's going to take to equality. For the reason that software is one of the most modern way to distribute know-how and content. But it depends, of course, from the point of view. So if you look at just Europe, then this could be. But if you look at about the world, where there is China and in India and Africa, where there are not healthcare systems like ours, they start from scratch. The opportunity there to use these kind of digital tools, in fact, they are investing a lot in this direction, is going to have that kind of population be able to access to innovative tools, innovative digital tools that otherwise in the traditional approach would not be available for them. So the standard healthcare system would not ever be available in Africa or in China, in India for obvious infrastructure reason. I will make just a very simple example on the surgical robots. Recently, Da Vinci, that after they have been trained by thousands or millions of surgery, have been able to execute a surgery all alone, without the support of a surgeon. So this is, of course, opening a world, but it's also opening a world for people that is not living near the hospital, and that maybe could be live near a robot, and could be more living in a more equal healthcare ecosystem. So, I said it's provocative. Of course, a lot of other complex elements, but it depends on the point of view. So this kind of a digitalization that, as I said before, is giving opportunity to make scalable things that are very complex in terms of know-how, because unfortunately we have to consider there are good doctor, but also bad doctor, and to train a good doctor is not easy, while the software, once they are good for everyone. And the cost of execution, and don't forget for a moment the license price, but the cost of execution is very low usually. And so this could take potentially to a better quality in terms of access of know-how, analysis, and so on, because otherwise, if you have a good machine, but you're not able to analyze the X-ray or MRI because you have not a good radiologist, only with the software you will be able to do that if you are in a remote place. And most of the people is not living now near hospitals, worldwide level.
Gordon?
Yeah, I mean, just to back up what Luca was saying, you know, the thing with software, we live in an increasingly virtualized world, you know, and just the very fact that you can adapt solutions to the level of technology in particular countries as well. You know, we obviously, you know, here in the Western world or in Europe in particular, you know, architecturally, you know, we have everything, you know, either located here or accessible here, and really that's the question. The question is, you know, how quickly can we make it scalable? You know, is you know, certain speeds for certain places and certain populations but you need a collective. You need a collective. So although we can manage that collective, you know, from a regional point of view, we can sometimes manage that collective from a global point of view. But you need regulators to agree to at least harmonise. You need standards organisations to commit to a more collaborative future, and not feel that they all need to get a stake in the game, you know, which is pretty evident. You can see from the work that's been going on. Hopefully, I'm supporting what Luca was saying in the sense that there are any number of paradigms. You know, the power of the clinician is going to change. The balance of the power of the clinician is going to change. The balance of, you know, the authority of the patient is going to change. You know, from an accessibility point of view, I don't want to get into an explainability and interpretability conversation, because that can easily become a conversation about, you know, making something complicated that you don't understand in order to explain something complicated that you don't understand. But transparency can work on many levels, but people have to be careful with the responsibility that comes with that transparency. You know, it's, you know, as soon as you have something that's, you know, software is very portable, it's very easy to give, you know, a regulator full access to, you know, to systems at any level. But with that comes, you know, a certain responsibility. And the same for patient organizations. I think you'd find a lot of healthcare manufacturers would be very open to that conversation. But again, you know, it comes with responsibility. So, you know, all of those kind of paradigms are in play.
Yeah, we will talk about responsibilities and of all stakeholders later. But I think it's a very interesting question that you are pointing here. Josep.
Yeah, well, I think this is I'm happy to be here because it's a lot of things that we can discuss, no? I am clinical pharmacologist. I stay in my life making clinical trials, even if I am patient. And in order to be very clear is that the scientific method, the best is the clinical trial, randomized, prospective, well done, and well published. I think this is no discussion, and this is normally that when a drug or a procedure or something is when it's approved by health authorities, is because, you know, there is evidence of the works, no? It's clinical trial, randomized, etc., etc. No? I think this is very important, no? There is other studies that, for example, case control studies, epidemiological studies, you know, that can help a lot. That big data, you know, this can help a lot. We are working in this issue, WAFI, and I think it's you know, that all discussed today. I think it's very important, not the intelligent artificial or the silico trials, no. We are working in this work in the European Agency of Drug. We are in the panel, and also in the Spanish agency, and we are working with this foundation with the FDA. And here there are some important points. I'm sure that will be very positive, you know, this approach, but there are some issues that we must, you know, take care. The first is that what does mean digital patient? What does mean digital patient? Theoretically, yes, it's a patient that is in the computer, but it's not exactly the same that a patient, when we ask to the patients in the classic, you know, office of the doctor in a clinical trial, is not exactly the same that in the digital. That means that this is a very important issue, no? Because we know very well when we ask to the patients, it depends of the doctor or the nurse ask to the patients from one manner or other manner would be difference of the results. We know that, and which is published. I mean, we are not saying nothing new, no? That means that I think it's very important that to know exactly what are the patients we are making in these silico trials, we can say, first. Second, I think it's very important to train to our patients, because, for example, in our disease, we have elderly people, you know, they are not all, but they're not habituated to work in digital terms. That means that we need here also to adapt, okay? I think this is a very important issue that I think we can adapt, no? But this is a very important issue, no? That means that the interaction between doctors, patients, in this context, I think is very important. And in fact, you know, it was said by the others, you know, partners in the discussion, is that I think it's very important that it's not easy to validate, you know, the classical, we can say, clinical trial with, the silicon trials. I mean, to know sure that, because the algorithm could be changed. I mean, anyway, I am sure that, for example, that could be a very useful tool. I mean, I'm sure, I completely agree with you. But we need to pay attention because a lot of things must be done, especially in the field of the relation between patients and doctors, when the doctors or nurses or the people that are making the research, the clinical research, they asking to the patients. I think this is a very important issue, no? And the ethical issues is important, and also the participation of the patients, I think, would be improved. But this is more or less to put it in the table of the discussion, no? I mean, there's a lot of work must be done in this context, in my point of view.
Okay, thanks, Josep. I think it's very important what you all three have said, like to grant education, to put the infrastructure to every people get access to this technology. I think that we just, Marco is off of the meeting. So Alessandro, do you have anything to add on this topic?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the issue of inequality plays out in at least two big domains. So, as a matter of global health, of course, there is issues to be discussed about whether and to which extent people in low to middle income country might actually benefit from digital health innovation. I think that some commentators are rather skeptical, some are very enthusiastic, but there are, I think, some forms of digital health that might be better suited to low and middle income countries, and others that are just not imaginable. I mean, just to if technologies are being developed in the northern part of the world, chances are that they will not be targeting diseases that are more prevalent or health issues that are more remarkable in other parts of the world. So this is one element that applies to the agenda of digital medicine, but in general, it's not specific to it. I mean, it's a general problem of medical innovation in general. And the other domain is more social inequalities, the effect of social inequality on the development of digital technologies for health. So, for example, one case that has been also making headlines recently is the fact that pulse oximetry devices, for example, are working at a much lower rate of performance with people with dark skin. So they were very inaccurate if used by Black people, for example, as compared to when they were used by white people. So this is a problem that needs to be taken seriously, and standards can be developed on how to mitigate this risk. And it's important, I guess, that we keep the topic in the conversation at all levels, from the level of developers to regulatory bodies, legislators, and the public as well. I mean, this is a problem that can only be addressed if there is a concerted effort in making health data more equitable, more representative of all ethnic groups, of all social demographic groups, age groups, etc. We know that the health data that we have today greatly overrepresent while male middle-aged patients. This is a fact. I mean, across all domains of medicine, from genetics to biobanks, we know that. There are efforts underway to mitigate this problem. For example, the precision medicine program in the US, the new precision medicine cohort that is called All of Us, have been created with the aim of being more representative than normal biobanks, and I think that this is a good thing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you about the bias of the data that we have available today. And talking about data, Alessandro, I will also ask you about, do you think that we are able nowadays to secure privacy of patients' data?
I mean, technically, it's there have been a lot of advances in cryptography, and a lot of the health data that are used in biomedical research, for example, need to comply with very strict standards. And in this respect, I mean, even the GDPR is a good example of how regulators can be aware of these problems. Nevertheless, health data are the most frequently hacked kind of data that we know of. So the problem is not over. So I would say that there are two ways to tackle this problem. On the one hand, there are the technical safeguards, of course, pseudonymizing data or anonymizing data for research purposes, but these are not as valuable in the domain of clinical use of data. The other issue is to make the consequences of data privacy breaches less harmful for data subjects. That means having in place better anti-discrimination laws and these kind of things. So there are interventions that can be mitigating the harmful effects of privacy breaches downstream of breaches. So on the one hand, we should try to prevent privacy breaches. On the other hand, we should try to prevent the harmful consequences of breaches when they occur. So I think that at this moment, there is no 100% privacy, and probably we should get used to the fact that this is an ideal that will never be in place despite remarkable improvements in technology. But just one last point, this shouldn't prevent us from advocating for data sharing and for widespread use of health data, because there is value in this data. It would be a pity not to extract this value for the benefit of patients, of course.
Yeah, sure. Jose Manuel, I don't know if you want to add something. I don't know if... Are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. This is the same point. It's difficult to us as a clinicians that participate in the validation phase from some EA tools to explain to the patient in order to the patient to be clear where is participating, and this is very important for us. And another point that the patient sometimes asks is, yes, you can use my data, but only for this purpose. That please don't use my data for any related purpose or posterior in the research activities. And this point have to be, or for our point of view, presents a gray area that is important to clarify. When can we use in a retrospective way patient's data for purposes that the patient has not given the consent, the informed consent from the patient?
Okay, that's an interesting point because it's also the next question. I'd like to ask Giuseppe about, do you think that patients should be the sole owners of their data? And to the other speakers, as Jose Manuel was saying, if we can share or we should share their data and with whom?
That's a very important question, no? I think for me, as I am patient representative, the data are from the patient, okay, for me. I mean, it's a philosophical issue, no? And now, for example, in Spain, for example, in the clinical hospitals, if patients can ask to the doctors. For example, I can example in the clinical hospital, the patients can see before the radiography than doctors. That means a new tool, because before, all the doctors, they have all the data, no? And even now happen. I mean, that sometimes patient asks to doctor, please, can you give me my radiography, or you can give me a report? And sometimes there is some resistance. I think patients has the right to have all the data from them. That's first, no? Second, it could be controversial, the second point, because normally the patient is very in favor to be open and to help to her doctor, or when they are in the clinical trials, they're very open. That means that I am not sure that the patients in general are against that the data could be to have with other doctors or with a project. I mean, you can ask to them to sign, and I think it's very important, and normally is done, is that to ask in the permission to the patients. No? But for me, I think that it's not good, for example, is that sometimes happen, even in the classical clinical trial, that sometimes patients go to the trial, and in the end, when they finish, they don't know exactly if they taking the placebo group or they are taking the drug. Huh? That is not correct. I mean, when you ask to the patients to go in the clinical trial, when the trial is finished, the doctor or the nurse should be explained if they are in the placebo group or in the control group. Sometimes happen that the doctors, they forget it to explain to the patients, because when a patient is making a clinical trial, they are doing a very important act, that to put their body in order for research. And I think we must be respect about that. And when they finish the trial, to explain to the patient if they are in a control group or in this active group, how works, etc. I think this is a very important, issue. No? Another issue is that, Marta, is that as you are here, people, researchers and people from different, I recommend, as I explained at the beginning, to go to the patient societies at the beginning to explain about the project, to explain even about the artificial intelligence or the silicon trials, wherever you want, to explain, because they can help a lot. Because, for example, in our case, I will explain you, is that, for example, in the clinical trials in osteoarthritis, do you know what is the efficacy of the placebo? The placebo in clinical trials, is 60%. And sometimes I say, well, I can recommend placebo, no? Because it's 60%. That is very important, because we don't have the method to analyze the pain, is the Hutchinson scale. I mean, it's validated worldwide by the FDA, by Spanish agency or whatever. We don't have method. That means that sometimes when we ask to the patients about the pain, it's very important that doctor asks the good question, and it's very, or nurse, and it's very important to explain, well, between 0 and 10, what is your pain? Normally, patient pain 9. Say 9? Do you mean that 10? What does mean 10? That means that some bus take un autobús te rompe la pierna. Esto es 10. Perdona que lo diga en español, I'm sorry, it's in Spanish. And you say, my God, no, I have 6. Imagine, but this is very important, because 10 is the maximum pain. Un tanque te pasa por encima, ¿no? Perdona la expresión, ¿no? This is very important, because if not, you have a bias, sure. And we know, for example, in the case of OA, that we say the floor effect. Floor effect does mean when the patient don't have too much pain, it's very difficult to say if the patient improve or not improve the pain. That means that in terms that we are speaking now, that means you are doing digital, that means we must be care and be sure that we ask to the patients correctly, even if it's that digital patient. Because if not, could we have problems? And you can maybe approve a drug that is not worse in pain, or the opposite, you can take out a drug that works. That means that this context, it's complicated. I mean, it's complicated, no? But I think it's very important. But my advice, if you permit to me, goes to the associations of patients and to ask to them if they can collaborate with you, because we will see how the knowledge that they have of the disease and could be very useful in this case, for the artificial intelligence or the silico trials. I think because they can help, and the patients normally are in favor because they would like to make more research to improve their disease, no? Especially imagine when the people have pain, like as the case with osteoarthritis, no? You know, I think this is very important, no?
So do you think that data should be shared? And you should educate also patients?
Yes.
Do you agree, Luca?
I think in my concern, yes.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'll make an example. It's like if you go to a doctor, you say, I am feeling bad. Well, you have, no, I don't tell you. So we have to develop drugs and medical devices. And the new technology to develop drug and medical devices, the effective one, etc., also for rare disease, is to have data. So people can decide not to share the data, but I have to say that now everyone has this kind of tools that is giving a lot of information all around, is collecting a lot of information. And from one side, we don't have so big problem to share. So we are living in a sharing world. So sometimes, probably once someone is asked to share the healthcare data, most of the people probably don't know what they are asked for. Because if you take away any kind of information that is able to identify the patient and then to discriminate, etc., I mean, your data are valuable for the public to the point that you could say, okay, I'm not using your data, but in the future, once a drug is developed for that, you're not going to access to that. It's like to say, everyone is here thanks to vaccine of COVID. If there was no vaccine, we wouldn't be here. Everyone would be at home with a mask and so on. It's because a lot of people went through the vaccination. So I think that it's also a moral you to provide the data and to let the data once they do not imply anything that is really personal. Because anyway, the data, they are not used by the data of Luca. They use data aggregated to hundreds of thousands of people and can help research. So once we establish that, once this is guaranteed, then I think it's really, really important there is a sharing of this information. And I think that from this point of view, the patient association can play a significant role because there was also a statistic going to parents of children with a very bad disease. And it was not at all considering the problem to not sharing the data because they was helping their children. So it's really, really important. It's really important to share data, but it's really important to discriminate what you are sharing so that you can legitimately tutelate the patient. But once it's done, then let's share as much as possible and let's use as much as possible. Then the regulators have to define something that don't make this data sharing become a market, because that's another problem. So these don't have to be a market, the data sharing or the data of patient, but if you would have the data of everyone, that wouldn't be bad, would be great for researchers. And so, yeah.
Yeah, you go to the point of usage of data also in industry and private sector. So Gordon, do you have anything to add about any misuse that can be done with this data?
I thought I had it on. Jerome talked about it earlier at the start of his presentation, and it speaks to the whole scalability conversation. And you know, it's emergent behavior. It's that aspect of emergent behavior, and you know, in an isolated sense, it's very difficult to control that. But it's that thing where you just have to think of the controls that can be reasonably established. You know, ultimately, you know, everybody at every level has, you know, has professional ethics. You know, clinicians have professional ethics. Providers have professional ethics. You know, there's all kinds of ethical things that we already do. You know, cybersecurity is about people. Privacy is about people. You know, these things have had regulations in place for a while. You have to, and no industry player is going to say that they don't want a data sharing system, right? No, because ultimately, you know, there's a commercial imperative. Of course there is. You know, one of the big problems today, maybe not so much in Europe as in the United States, but it's the cost of drugs, the cost of biologics, and a lot of industry players will say, well, you know, come and see the failure rate drug production, from stage 0, if we can call it that, all the way through to stage 3 and release. It's something like 90 to 95%, depending on what drug or what biologic you look at. Now, any industry player is going to say, I have a right to try and lower that failure rate. And if I can do it, I'm not suggesting we suddenly create digital patients for stage 3, but if we can do that, if we can do a lot more synthetic work at stage 0, stage 1, to work out what won't work, and that's what's important, because not only is that a risk downstream, but it's that idea to kind of model what won't work, to be able to simulate proteins, whatever use case you want to use, but it's about having that opportunity and consent. I mean, we as an industry player, we're happy for a third party to be in the middle of that. We're happy for more than one third party to be in the middle of that. At the end of the day, we don't want personal information. What we want is representative data. And I think all the speakers have mentioned that, you can have inequality built in simply because, a certain treatment is only affordable to a certain population. But if we don't control people's perceptions, if we don't inform people and start this conversation early, then we'll bake inequality in, because, a majority of people won't share their data because they think, I'm being genetically cloned somewhere. And I'm being a little bit flippant to make the point, but you've got to make people feel that just as they're sharing their location data when they use Google Maps, or just when they're sharing their preferences for particular movies, yeah, all of these things can be put together to learn who you are as a person, but it's the greater good. It's the greater good. If you have limitations on data sharing, you artificially create orphan medicine situations. You artificially create that kind of data limitation. And so then, therefore, if we create a scenario where people can, the default is you don't want to share your data, rather than the default being you do want to share your data and you have to remove consent, then people have to allow for that synthetic data conversation to be reasonably discussed. Because the only way to increase that data population is to use synthetic data techniques. And, it's far too detailed to get into today, but all of these things need to be part of that mature discussion. And as an industry, as someone here to speak on behalf of industry, we will always work within whatever regulations exist, but, if you want to increase the availability of care, if you want to increase the availability of treatment, then these things all speak to increases somewhere, and hopefully that makes sense.
It makes perfectly sense. And I think that all we are going to the idea of that we have to work all together to have this education, communication, language, and regulations. But I would like to ask you about, the million-dollar question. How do we work together? How we get to the point to have all stakeholders sit together and work for common regulations, transparency, liability, equality in silico medicine and digital health? I don't know, if maybe Alessandro, do you want to start this question?
Oh, yes. Well, first of all, I think that patients do want to share their data. We have several examples of very active patient community who do want to share their data, and this is the driving force of data sharing in general. So I'm a firm believer that this bottom-up approach is the most promising one. Then I think we have to create the conditions for data sharing to happen in a safe and equitable way. And we have the instruments to make it happen in that way. And these instruments will, I'm sure, in the long run, convince also patients or that are more reluctant to actually appreciate the benefit, the greater good of data sharing. These tools are, for example, more granular form of informed consent in which patients can exert some form of meaningful control over what is shared and for what purposes, and under which conditions. I think we should not be too much worried of the distinction between the public and the private sector, meaning that the private sector is a valuable component of the data ecosystem, and we need to make it possible also for private companies to get access in a safe and effective way to health-related data. What I'm not a firm believer in is the model of data ownership. I think the data ownership is not the way to go. It will, in the long run, restrict accessibility to data. And also, I think that it inadvertently shifts the burden, the responsibility from data users to data subjects. And I don't know if data subjects are in a position to actually be the broker of their own data. So in the long run, I don't see the benefit of a model that is based on data ownership by data subjects. So to answer your question, I think that we should go bottom up, and we should really do the piecemeal work of creating the right tools and the right conditions to increase, in general, the public trust in the data ecosystem through which we share our data, our very valuable data, for most likely for the greater good of future patients, not for the benefit of ourselves.
Okay, Luca.
Just very quick comment. Also, let me be provocative also on this regarding the informed consent. The informed consent, I'm sorry to say it, but it's a very big hypocrisy. Because I think that all of you that have been to a doctor, you've never been through a real explanation, a complete explanation on informed consent and signature of what you were able to understand. And you are young researchers. So think about people that is not able to understand at all. So, I mean, we are comparing the digital and the dissemination and the consent to data to something that is happening now in a way that, let me say, is not at all acceptable. But it's happening every day, not only in the healthcare, but also bank or many other areas where we are signing in 2 minutes and we don't know what we are signing. So from this point of view, we think that it will make really sense to ask ourselves if going to digital, from this point of view, giving opportunity to people to review the informed consent before, to be trained on what they're going through, to see video, to ask questions, to answer a question or to ask question is maybe a better way than the traditional way. So maybe digitalization is not better, is not worse, sorry, for data management, but is better. Because the people start to really provide an informed consent that is really informed, first of all, and then there is a consent. Because now this is not what's happening.
We will move to Josep and then to our handing here in Zoom.
I think your question is an excellent question, as always. You know, I will tell you one thing that is very important, no? For me. Patients, each time is taking care more responsibility of their health. This is clear. I will tell you an example. When I was I got my MD in the hospital Valle d'Hebron, and when I asked to the patients about, you remember about the surgery? Well, I remember I take a bocadillo of calamares, no? But I remember that Dr. Salapatau made the intervention, but I don't know exactly why. It was 35 years ago, and it was a cholecystectomy, no? But now the patients know everything. The patients go to some Google and check it. The problem also in the system is that the doctors, especially with the COVID time, was difficult that the patients go to the doctors. That means that each time, patients is taking more responsibility of their health. This is sure, and will be do it. I'm sure about that. I don't have any question. That means in our case, as we are representative in a way in the world, the patient are in the center of the disease, but real in the center, not in the future. No, we are in the center. No, we are in the center, and we are creating a cluster, and a community. And what involved in the community? That involve health authorities, because we are there. I can explain an example. We just stop a process in the Ministry of Health that they would like to not reimburse drugs. And UAFI achieved that, especially for women, that the drugs will be reimbursed. Never happened in Spain. It was the patients that we do it. Pharmaceutical companies, of course, that is very important, because the minister, the minister of, of the world, they don't make drugs. That means the pharmaceutical companies, very important issue to be there. And also, universities, different companies, medical associations, nurses associations, everything will be involved and working together in this cluster. I can tell you, it's the only way. In our case, because in the case of osteoarthritis, as I mentioned you before, it's not a glamour disease, we don't have too much treatments available, analgesics and NSAIDs that you can use chronically. Then we need to do it. And now we are doing this cluster here in Barcelona. We are doing this cluster. The companies that are working with us, health authorities, making our congress. We make congresses with patients free. We make a congress in Barcelona. It was 30 tables, 3 days. And you go to a doctor, there's nothing we can do with OA. Go to the congress and you will see 30 tables speaking about how can improve the way in the patients. Okay? And that's the way. That means that even is in the artificial intelligence or silico trials, more or less is exactly the same. We must work together. And the patients are very active today and will be doing more. That means I recommend, as I mentioned in the beginning, contact to the patients, ask to the patients, because they can help to you. They will be happy that to participate in trials, in the ideas and everything. And also, if necessary, to go to politicians, they go to the politician, especially before to the vote. It's very useful, because you can ask to the politician what you can do with patients, and they will see everything. I can support the patients. Before the election, later we'll see, no? I think very important, this issue.
Thanks, Josep. So I think that we have one question here in Zoom, please.
Yes, I fully agree that patients should be central. And I'm also working for the In Silico World project that Professor Visconti was talking about. We have a work package dealing with communication towards the public, and they are going to organize workshops with hospitals and also with organizations working with patients. I'm working for a work package on education, and I prepared a survey to investigate the educational needs within universities, for instance, and we are also contacting people from industry as well in order to verify what are the training needs, what are the barriers that people experience, what do we would like to achieve. And we see that both physics-based models are needed, as shown during the hands-on sessions. And we also see that there's a growing need for artificial intelligence as well, and that it can really support medicine towards patients. So I will put a link in the chat, if I'm allowed, to people who have been attending this conference in order to fill in a survey in order to collect intended learning outcomes, so that we will be able to organize courses for students on one hand, but also to retrain professionals on the other hand in the long term on in silico medicine, and to work together in an appropriate way.
Okay, many thanks. Yeah, the key, as you have seen, is work together. So now it's time for us to ask to our audience. Do you have any question? Jérôme? Jérôme has one question.
I just want to have a drink, but but actually, well, I have one comment and one question. The first thing is, so Luca, you were mentioning now models so are good, and you gave the example of the programmable robots in a place where you cannot have medical doctors, etc. I agree. This is one view. But I would like here to stretch the concept of context of use a little bit, because it depends. If you take, for example, the e-administration. E-administration is very good, and I'm a fan of e-administration. I don't have to rush into an office during working hours, etc. I can be late at night doing my stuff, etc. But when e-administration removes the personal contact in case of problem, in case where the problem I have to solve doesn't fit into the model that the e-administration has set up, for me, everything becomes a nightmare. And as a person working in a different country, you know, a foreigner that works in a different country and even can have shared work contract, etc., I really struggled with that. So, and another example relative to that, stretching the context of use, no? So it's fine to have the robot, but having the robot shouldn't be an excuse for not then having all the set of professionals in case something goes wrong, because nothing is failure-proof. And there is another example of context of use we were discussing recently with people from Pactoli, which is a public hospital here, is if we have models that improve the capacity of diagnostic, we'll probably diagnostic faster and more people. So the objective is, of course, to provide better treatment. But if hospitals are already collapsed with all the misdiagnosed people and with all people who are not diagnosed on time. So imagine if we increase by 20% or by 30% the number of diagnoses under the premise that better healthcare will be provided. It will just be catastrophic. So I think it should so go along a proper identification of a change of context of use that the use of model will impose. And that was a comment, and of course, I'm happy to hear your answer and maybe disagreement.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. My comment was related to the perspective. So it really depends on when we say we, what we mean by we. We mean the people of Barcelona, we mean the Spanish people, European people, or worldwide people. In Europe, we're saying that we have no war in the last 70 years. Unfortunately, now we have a war near to Europe. But there are other continents where they had Europe, where they have a war some years ago. I mean, also in Europe, we had a war in Bosnia some years ago, but maybe was not so, relevant to talk about that in the past. So if you consider the millions of citizens of the world, the millions of citizens don't have hospitals. They don't have physicians. So so from the mass point of view of the human beings, they don't have the problem of overcrowded hospital. They have a problem that they don't have the hospital. So that's the reason I said I'm provocative, because of course we have to rethink our hospital care, also because it's really expensive. When we talk about biologics, we have to consider that there are gene therapy that the country don't pay for the patient, but they exist. But they say, don't pay $500,000 for that patient, because the way they are working is to have for a patient 100,000 euro per year. And they cannot anticipate $500,000 because that break the budget. Or for the hepatitis, there is the therapy, okay? But it's 60,000 euro. And so only if you're in a certain condition, you're going to have it. So there is people that cannot be treated. So when I say we, I refer to the world. for the human being of the world. So from this point of view, the point is that this kind of technology can help more than create a problem from the numbers. Then I totally agree with you that if you take away the person and you just you're not able to talk with anyone, there is e-health, pure e-health without a doctor, then this becomes a nightmare. But it's worse if you don't have anything, like most of the people is not having something now, if you think about India, China, Africa, where we have billions of people. But let me say, so I agree with you. At a global scale, there is another perspective that I would like to point it out.
I was making this comment is that very often people present, and we've seen that in some presentations, people present in silico technologies as cheaper solution. So I agree for the development within a company, etc., but at the system level. So I think this might be a non-ethical promise to say to the system, you will save money on the healthcare system if, thanks to the digital solution. It might not be true.
Sorry, a very quick last comment, I won't take my time off of the other colleagues, is that we have also considered that there are, in front of the request, less and less physicians. The number of physicians available are decreasing. So the problem is that you have to provide more outcome with less people. And so you have to get this efficiency. So it's not a matter of you save money, but maybe you are able to do something that otherwise you're not able to do. Because if you have X-ray, a lot of X-ray, you don't have the people able to look at them, you need to use the software, because otherwise the people doing that is not so much trained, they're too young and they make too much error, or there is no people at all. So unfortunately, the future in terms of healthcare is really problematic, because it's starting to cost a lot. Everyone is becoming chronic. More people need therapies. We were talking about osteoarthritis that is increasing because there is more people that is not 10 years old that don't have osteoarthritis usually, and that's become a problem how to treat them.
To your question, that is good. I think it's important to take in mind that, for example, each time the European Agency of Drugs, of the FDA, they approve less drugs, a lot of less drugs. Why? Because the cost of the clinical trials, it's incredible. Incredible. I mean, sometimes you need thousands of patients in the clinical trials. No? You remember some years ago, in phase 3 clinical trials, you need 600 patients, 1,000 patients. Now, maybe 10, 12,000. That means that each time there are less and less companies that they can approve as a drug. I think one of the challenge of the artificial intelligence is try to have, that is very complicated in my opinion, the same results. I mean, you can recommend something with the less cost. Because the problem that there are now is that sometimes you see drugs that could be useful, but they don't have money to make the research. And happen in the end is that sometimes patients, they don't have the possibilities to receive or to be treated by drugs because the cost of the clinical trials is incredible. That means that I think this is one point that we must consider also. No? For example, I will tell you an example that with the patients involved can help. For example, we see, I refer my experience, no? We see in the women's, there are 30% of women with, arthrosis, of the main, no? Severity, with a lot of severity, no? And it's nothing that treatment available, is nothing there, no? And we see by a serendipity, serendipity casuality, we see that the women that take some product by the asthma, they improve, the erosive arthritis of the hands. Normally, if a pharmaceutical company goes to health authorities, they ask for a lot of trials and a lot of things, no? The patients go there, and the health authorities permit to us to make a clinical trial with 200 patients, 150 placebo and 150 with the treatment. Why? Because the patients say, please help to us, because we don't have treatment available with erosive hands, of the erosive or static hands, no? That means that I think this is a very important issue to take care, no? And I hope that these tools, that we speak today could be, a good succeed. And that I think always happens, is that could be improve a lot the quality of life for our patients, I hope, and I am sure that will be very positive, I'm sure about that.
There's a phenomena that's emerging, and Luca gave me the pointer here with the clinical base is shrinking. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if you were making a medical device, it would start off in the clinical space. The idea for it would start off with a surgeon or some other practicing clinician, and they would. One or two or three of them would stay involved with the development of that device if it reached the point of passing all the clinical trials, and they would expect some kind of payment, an ethical payment at the end of that process, being a co-developer or co-designer. But once that device was released for production and sale, they would go back into their clinical role. What's starting to emerge is clinicians are getting into the software business, and they're not going back into the clinical world. They're forming startups. They're claiming, there's clinicians who can actually they have programming skills. They have pretty decent programming skills. I mean, I've been involved with a few cases from a due diligence perspective. Without naming any individuals or any companies, these guys have stood up a whole digital stack, and the motivation. Depending on how that business progresses, are they going to step back and stay in the clinical world? That's a challenge. That's a challenge. So, if that's a digital problem, you have to find a digital solution.
Okay, maybe it's time to go to have some drinks. Or there's any question, or do you rather to ask the question with some drinks? Yeah, for some drinks? Okay, so many thanks to everybody, and sorry for the delay.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for this very nice discussion roundtable that have raised a lot of very interesting points. This closes the VPH Summer School, and we'll continue with the drinks.